Colleagues, if you wouldn't mind taking your seat, I'd like to call the joint workshop between the Tallahassee City Commission and the Leon County Commission to order. It is Tuesday, July 13th, a couple minutes after 9 o'clock. It's good to see everybody. We've got a packed chamber. This is going to be a great workshop. A couple of housekeeping items. This meeting, this workshop was publicly advertised from 9 until noon. I do intend to have a hard stop at noon. I know many of us have scheduled the afternoon, so I think that we'll be able to get through all of our business, no problem. We have one action item, specifically dealing with the report on homelessness in Tallahassee, Leon County. And then we have two updates, an update on the Tallahassee Housing Authority and Orange Avenue Apartment Redevelopment Project, and then a status report on the Tallahassee, Leon County residential real estate and construction market. We will deal with homelessness in Tallahassee, Leon County first. Again, that is the one item that is an action item. The other two are status updates. Before we begin, I know that Commissioner Welch is participating via WebEx. Commissioner Welch, are you with us? Do you have a good connection?
Yes, sir. Can you all hear me?
We can. Mr. Chairman, let me go ahead and turn it over to you for a motion on the county side by your rules to allow Commissioner Welch to participate and be a voting member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Commissioners, thank you for being here this morning. City, thank you very much for hosting us for this workshop. In the interest of time, I think we'll limit debate to this question by 10 minutes, but if there's a motion to allow Commissioner Welch to attend this workshop virtually, that'd be great. Motion's been made by Commissioner Dozier, seconded by Commissioner Maddox. All in favor on the County Commission in favor of the motion on the table, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Excellent, thank you. Is this
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. The update on the real estate market is a very good report. As referenced in the report, it pertains a good bit to our upcoming housing workshop in early 22. The other two agenda items have a tremendous amount of substance. If we don't get to full discussion on the housing issue, on the housing stock, we can move that to our workshop later in 22. And I just don't want to limit the discussion on housing, on homelessness or Orange Avenue. So I kind of wanted to make that suggestion at this point.
Sure.
I don't know if everyone else is amenable to it, but the other two items are pretty critical right now.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Okay, before we begin, first of all, let me welcome Abena Ojitayo from the City of Tallahassee, Shinkton Lammy from the county, and Amanda Wander from the Big Bend Continuum of Care. I know the three of y'all have put a lot of time and energy in today's joint workshop, and I personally want to say thank you. I think your product is absolutely phenomenal, and we look forward to the presentation. Before we begin, Ms. Ojitayo, do we have any agenda modifications?
Not that I'm aware of. You just have your three items.
All right, no agenda modifications. All right, folks, this is how we're going to do it today. What I would like is we're going to start off on the report on homelessness in Tallahassee, Leon County. To make sure that we are all on the same page, I'm going to ask that we have the full presentation. If you have a couple questions, that's cool, but let's really just allow the presentation to take place. Immediately after the presentation, we're going to open it up for public comment. I think it's important to have the presentation first, so everybody has the same information. After public comment, we will go into commission discussion and direction. So with that, Ms. Ojitayo, I will turn it over to you. And again, thank you for the hard work that y'all have done on this item.
Thank you so much, Mayor, and good morning, commissioners. It is a pleasure to be before you. We have a ton of material in front of you. I see the thick notebook binders, and I feel a little bad for you, but it is the product of so much conversation and so much coordination between multiple agencies. And so today, if you will allow us, we'll spend some time on this first item, just giving you a really quick overview of the information, and we'll certainly dive into any level of detail that you would like us to do when you begin your deliberations. All right, it's working now, like magic. The mayor has already laid out the framework for you. Today, as also been mentioned, I have my colleagues from the county with me. We have staff from our respective departments that are in the audience as well. They've worked tirelessly to make us prepared, and so we're really grateful for them. And thank you as well to Amanda. I know your whole team is here as well. I want to begin by saying that this conversation is broad, and we recognize that the issue of homelessness really falls along a long spectrum of how we get people safely and securely housed. That is the way we're viewing it as staff, and that is how our colleagues view it. And so today's information, while we've divided it up into three, really sometimes it's a seamless process. You have in front of you a blow-up version of the image that I have here, and the full item is also an attachment to your agenda. What we want you to see here is that when somebody is experiencing homelessness, whether that is on the street or in one of our shelters, there are many stops through which they might go to, and there are many places where they might land that brings some form of housing security. It's not the same, and it's not the same solution for every individual. It varies. But also, we have so many partners that are actively engaged in every part of this work. And so we tried our best to compile data from multiple sources to try to paint a picture for you. You don't have to digest all of it now, but it's sort of a cheat sheet that's in front of you for as we continue our conversation throughout. You'll see the stages of housing from secure, insecure to more security. You'll see some of the capacity levels that we have at our various stages. You'll see the utilization rate at each of those, so whether it's at a shelter or what we know about our permanent supportive housing. And then we have estimated some of the public funding based on what we know from the county and from the city, as well as from state and federal resources that come to our community through various channels. And lastly, in coordination with the COC, we've tried to make some projections of where we think the gaps are. So for those of you that are nerdy about this stuff like me, sometimes the numbers are all you need to see, and hopefully it paints some picture for you. But we certainly have backed it up with several pages of narrative as well that we invite everyone to delve into and to really appreciate the scale of the task ahead and the sheer volume of people that are engaged in this work every single day. So who is homeless?
This is great, by the way. Great job putting together the spreadsheet.
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Porter.
really quick, I was just wondering about if you could clarify for me and the public what exactly the utilization rate means.
Yes, ma'am. So the utilization rate is our estimate of how much of the number of beds or number of units that are used right now that has somebody in it or somebody claiming that. It does fluctuate. One thing about our housing industry, and I think you'll hear it throughout every item, is that it is very dynamic. No one is homeless forever. No one is in an apartment forever. No one owns a home forever. And so there is some dynamism that you have to anticipate, but it is our best guess of where we are as a system right now.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So back to the question of who is homeless, I think we may assume that everybody is aware about this. We do, on any typical night in Tallahassee, you might have 500 to 800 individuals that are experiencing homelessness. That is, for some of us, the first person that comes to mind is the person that is sleeping on the street. It includes that individual or anybody who is in a place that is not fit for human habitation. It also includes anyone that is in an emergency shelter right now, somebody who lacks a fixed or regular housing, meaning they might be sleeping couch to couch. They might be in a family setting in a home, but it is not their permanent home, and they really are not secure in their next place of residence. It includes youth that are unaccompanied, that may have been kicked out from their homes, or maybe run away, or maybe pregnant. It also includes folks that are fleeing domestic violence. The moment that our officers respond to that and they need to go somewhere safe, they are technically defined as homeless. And so again, this definition is broad, and the work that our agencies are doing right now is serving a really broad group of individuals that you might not even know are homeless. They might be students in the schools. They might be colleagues. We also have several defined interventions. We look to HUD, the Federal Housing and Urban Development Agency, that helps us to define what homelessness is, but also what are the data-backed and the science-based and time-tested interventions that we know work. And it goes it spans the whole range from prevention, that is somebody who is in a house now, and if we can prevent them from being homeless, that is usually the best intervention we can have. For also includes diversion. That is, if somebody is seeking emergency or temporary shelter, if we can work with them to divert them to a better resource so that they don't enter shelter, we found that that is also a very effective intervention. Street outreach is very familiar to you all. I think everybody is aware, but having a coordinated approach where teams are going out specifically for different groups that are vulnerable and reaching out to them in a way that makes them feel seen and heard and helped according to their needs is an important intervention. We, of course, also have emergency shelter operations, and we have these 4 that are supported by both the city and the county. We have the individual men and women shelter at the Kearney Center. We have CCYS for youth. We also have Refuge House for domestic violence victims. And all of these agencies work together in a coordinated way, and you'll hear a little bit more about that through our partner at the COC. And we also have, forgive me, Sylvia, we also have Hope Shelter, which is our shelter for families and individuals with children. And that actually is quite impressive for a small city like ours. I mean, a big city, Commissioner Richardson. We are a big city. But that number of shelters is something we can be proud of, especially those that are targeted for those populations. We also have rapid rehousing, and that's something that we've beefed up tremendously in the past year. And that is where we look at those that are already sheltered or maybe at risk of going into a shelter, and we prioritize housing them first. For the first time in the city's history, we put a tremendous amount of resources in that, thanks to the injection of funds that we've seen in the recent years. We also have transitional housing, and those are usually programs that last between 12 to 18 months. They're targeted for different populations. They work with a client for a period of time, and the whole goal is to transition them to something more permanent. And then you have permanent supportive housing, and this is a critical piece of the puzzle because you have individuals that either are disabled or based on their circumstances right now, they will never be able to live independently without some kind of support, or it will take some time. And so permanent supportive housing matches case management with housing, and it supports them as long as they need it. And it removes them from the chronic homeless statistic, which you'll hear a lot about today as well, because we do have individuals that have been homeless for a very long time, and they've lived in shelters, and that is not ideal in any way, shape, or form. Lastly, we also have housing choice vouchers, and that is where you start to see us blend into that part of the spectrum that leads into public housing. You'll hear a little bit more about that in our second agenda item as well. So, of course, an individual can come in at a prevention stage where they are safely and securely housed, and they get some homelessness services to prevent them from getting a shelter, and that's it. We may never see them again. But we might also have somebody who's chronically homeless, receives the help, transitions into a voucher for a couple months, and then eventually moves on into market rate. All of these things are happening every day, in and out, through the help of our really critical service providers in the community. Lastly, this past year, and when I say we've become really close, I mean, between Shinkton, Amanda, myself, all the different phone calls that we have, our thoughts are almost in sync. But for the first time ever, our community has a homelessness dashboard. You have this as one of the attachments in your item, and we provided a printout for you as well today. This is phenomenal. Again, I'm geeking out, so allow me. Several portals of information just all over the place. And what we've learned is that the only way we can make true systemic change is, one, if we talk to each other, that we share information, and we make it as real time and as dynamic as the situation itself demands. And so we have that now through the work of staff coordinating with all of our service providers and providing a one-stop place where you can understand who is in our system, who are our clients, and how are they performing, and where are the funds going. And so we've tried to collate that for you today so that you can have that in the background as you begin this very critical conversation. We're very proud of it. We think it's become very useful for all of our service providers, and we hope to build this out more over the years. All that to say, collaboration has been key. I think we are in such an important stage right now where our partners are all at the table, and you all have the incredible burden, but also the privilege to usher us into some really bold steps ahead. And so we're really pleased to have our partners here. And I will hand it over right now to our Amanda Wander, who is the Executive Director for the Big Bend Continuum of Care, to talk about some of the work.
Amanda, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're honored to be at the table. We're excited to have all of our providers here. We are here to give a voice to those who don't have that chance every day. And we're thankful that you guys are focusing on this issue. And one key word that Abena mentioned is bold. Bold is what we need to be today to make a difference. So you guys are probably pretty familiar with what the COC is at this point. But there are 27 COCs across the state of Florida, over 400 across the nation. The COC is the designated entity that can apply for HUD COC funding, as well as state homelessness funding. And only the COC can do that. So individual providers, individual cities, counties, what have you, cannot do that without that designation of being the COC. So it's key that communities work with their COC to make sure they're leveraging everything they can for this population. Our areas of focus as a COC, as statutorily mandated, are strategic planning, service coordination, completing funding requests, and making recommendations about allocations. We also manage the data system that covers our area, and our area specifically is an 8-county sprawl from Taylor County all the way to Liberty County. We also administer the coordinated assessment and entry for people coming into our services, as well as conducting the point-in-time count, which is an annual count in January of everyone's experiencing homelessness. Part of what the structure that HUD provides us is metrics to measure and compare ourselves against other COCs and other communities of our size to see how we're doing and how we're actually moving the needle and decreasing homelessness. And so the measures that HUD sets forth for us to monitor are length of time homeless, how many nights does someone experience homelessness, how many of the people exiting the system of care to permanent housing then return within a 2-year period, so recidivism, the number of people experiencing homelessness on the night of the point-in-time count, as well as throughout the year, an annual count. We also look at employment and income growth for people who are experiencing homelessness. We know that there is a large percentage of our population that can increase their income. There are also those that will never be part of the working force. We also look at successful placements to permanent housing and how well programs do exiting people from a homeless intervention into long-term permanent sustainable housing, and then retaining that housing after they've been there for a bit. We were so thankful to be able to work with staff on both the city and county side. When we talk about resources and dedicating resources to homelessness, that includes staff time. And staff on the city and the county side have really dug in. I cannot tell you how many conversations I have daily with staff about data and them helping us to visualize things and make things more simplistic. So what you're seeing are segments of the dashboard that's been put together. And we wanted to clear up any misconceptions about what's happening locally and what some of your concerns about homelessness might be. We've seen an overall 29% decrease in homelessness over a period of years in Tallahassee and Leon County. And this has been a pretty deliberate strategic approach from the COC since 2015 or so. We've seen a 56% decrease in homeless youth. And there are 2 areas that are on here for us to pay attention and hopefully talk about today, which there is an increase in veteran homelessness and increase in chronic homelessness. And so we need to put some things in place to make that turn around and be a decrease so that we can reach functional zero, which I'll explain in a moment. All right, to explain a bit about what our system performance measures look like locally, we, this past year for 2020 data, submitted to HUD our system performance measures. On average, people experience homelessness 144 nights in our community, which is far too long. people return to homelessness at a rate of 33%. So if somebody has exited the homeless system of care, moved into permanent housing, and has been in permanent housing for 2 years, doing a little bit of follow-up and seeing if they come back in the system within that 2-year period, 33% of those people who had positive permanent exits come back. That's also an area of attention. We also need to do some strategies that we'll suggest today to increase permanent housing placements. So right now, from homeless service programs, 33% of folks are going into permanent housing type settings. National average is more at 40% right now. So we need to make things possible for us to reach that 40% to be competitive for federal funding. Through our strategic plan, which does encompass the entire 8-county area, it's not just specific to the City of Tallahassee and Leon County, we have set some pretty aggressive targets over the next few years. And we're really thankful to be here today to have you guys help us figure out how we're going to get there. And we will be doing this same thing with other communities as well and helping them, piece the puzzle together so that we can achieve these targets.
Amanda, if I can get you to pull the microphone just a little closer.
Sure. I don't speak on a mic every day, guys. Thank you.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
All right. So as I mentioned before, we want to see that 144 nights of experiencing homelessness to go down. And for 2021, we have a goal of having it be less than 144 nights. But by 2025, this is a very aggressive goal. We want to see that it is less than or equal to 30 nights. People, if their system is resourced well, people can get in and out very quickly. And other communities have done this for segments of their population. We also want to decrease the returns to homelessness. We want people to move on from the system and stay supported in their housing. It's much easier to support people in housing versus once they have lost everything and come to the system. So 2021, we would like to see that less than 21% return within 6 months and less than 33% return within 2 years. And then our 2025 target is that less than 20% return in 2 years. We also want to make sure that we monitor how many people come into our system who experience first-time homelessness. So we want to see a decrease in first-time homelessness. This is often mitigated with prevention and diversion funds, but we want that number to be less than 1,500 annually. We also want to increase permanent housing placements. 2021 target is that 65% of permanent housing placements would be made directly from street outreach. We have something to be really proud of here locally in that our street outreach teams currently have an 81% permanent housing rate. This is unheard of, and we are probably one of the top COCs in the nation with our placement rate from street outreach. So the 65 is more reasonable and more in line with national average. We also want to see that 95% of people exiting our system to permanent housing stay in permanent housing. And so sometimes you can support that with prevention and diversion services so that they don't return. I think this is you, right?
Good morning, Commissioners.
Morning.
Thank you, Amanda.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Good to see you, too, Mr. Mayor. Well, good morning again. I'm going to very briefly touch on the joint efforts of the county and city to address homelessness in our community because the bulk of my presentation will focus on the recommendations that are in your workshop packet that will build on what we've been doing together to immediately respond to the most pressing needs of our most vulnerable population and to better integrate our homeless services that in the long term will increase the capacity of services provided to individuals and families experiencing homelessness. It's also a recommendation will show how we are going to leverage our local investments to draw down additional federal funding to address our community needs. But I'll start with what we've been doing over the past year. Commissioners, as our community experienced a global pandemic, our homeless population was especially hit as our shelters grappled to meet CDC guidelines, and many others of our smaller partners were forced to suspend services the homeless depend on for meals, blankets, and toiletries, just some examples. Together, the county and city, in coordination with the COC, responded to the past year with nearly a dozen initiatives and investments that you see in these next couple of slides to address the unexpected needs caused by the pandemic, and most importantly, prohibit the spread of COVID-19 in our homeless population. So I'll quickly hit and highlight a couple of those. So together, we opened the Community Relief Center for unsheltered individuals at the Salvation Army when the Carney Center transitioned to hotels. In the Relief Center, individuals experiencing homelessness were provided meals, showers, cots, and case management services. Together, we provided non-congregate sheltering for homeless individuals and families who were diagnosed with COVID-19 or were awaiting test results to ensure no outbreak in our homeless shelters. And we've been very successful because none of our shelters have experienced a spread of COVID-19. Let me knock on wood. And now, together, as you can see on the final bullet, we have allocated more than $6 million from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, for the highest homeless service needs that are consistent with the COC strategic plan and goals and targets that have been presented by Amanda. With the ARPA funds, we'll continue to invest in our homeless shelters for unanticipated expenses related to COVID-19, not supported by FEMA or no other federal or state funding sources, such as for things as increased security costs and food services. We'll invest in permanent supportive housing to provide housing and case management to the most vulnerable and chronically homeless. We'll invest in capacity building to provide training and technical support to grassroots and essential partners like Jacob's Chapel and Good Samaritan to grow the stock of homeless service providers in our community. And with ARPA funds, we'll build on the efforts of the outreach teams led by the COC to recruit and hire people who were once homeless themselves, to engage individuals and families living in cars, behind businesses, and in the woods, and connect them with resources and ultimately housing. And finally, ARPA funds will be utilized for diversion and prevention to provide relief to individuals and families on the brink of losing their homes with rent assistance, mortgage assistance, car repairs, as well as hotel costs to mitigate stays at our emergency shelters. The allocations for ARPA funds for these programs that I just mentioned were approved by both the county and city commissions in May, with $1.78 million going directly to our homeless shelters and the remaining $4.8 million for programs that I just touched on to be overseen by the COC. However, since then, we've been closely working with Amanda and the COC team in the development of today's workshop, as well as plans to distribute the ARPA fundings with a new approach, and that is to dedicate some of the program funds to a new CHSP category that I will talk about in more detail shortly. With this new proposal of ARPA funding described in the workshop packet, we'll immediately be able to address the most pressing needs, which include engaging the unsheltered with resources like housing, and building capacity with our grassroots partners that traditionally haven't received local, state, or federal funding for homeless services. Long term, in working with the COC, we have an opportunity to build on the county and city's collaborative efforts to better integrate homeless services and leverage local dollars to get more federal funds into our community. And so that leads me to the recommended options in your workshop packet, starting with option number 2 in your packet. With this option, commissioners, the county and city would jointly contract with the COC in the amount of $1.4 million to address the immediate needs by expanding local street outreach, by providing permanent supportive housing to our most vulnerable homeless population like the chronically homeless and the unsheltered, by providing training and technical assistance to neighborhood-based and grassroots organizations to build capacity and increase the network of homeless service providers. And finally, the COC would support us with the implementation of the proposed CHSP homeless service category that is recommended in the workshop packet. The COC would have specific responsibilities that I will touch on when I present the homeless service category. But before I do that, though, we thought it would be important to talk a little bit about CHSP and how most homeless services programs are funded locally today. The Community Human Services Partnership, or CHSP, is the joint initiative of the county and city and the primary way in which we jointly plan and fund human services through 10 categories in our community. And we've been doing that for over 20 years. The categories range from children's services, family support, community support, and that's just to name a few. Since 2018 now, CHSP has operated a 2-year funding cycle. We're currently in the first fiscal year of the current 2-year funding cycle, so FY21. FY22 will serve as the second year of this current 2-year funding cycle. Every 2 years, the citizen review teams, which are established for each category and are comprised of local residents, make funding recommendations that are approved by the county and city commissions, respectively. Currently, there are approximately 6 homeless service programs we fund in CHSP. Right now, they don't participate in the funding. Right now, we don't coordinate with the COC on the homeless service programs we fund in CHSP. They don't participate in funding deliberations conducted by citizen review teams, and the performance metrics presented today used to determine the conditions of homeless populations and secure funding through HUD is not formally utilized in CHSP. So that brings us to option number 3 in your workshop packet, which proposes the establishment of the homeless services category, which would consolidate all of our homeless services programs into a single category. This category would align with the HUD activities for funding, including programs such as homeless services and permanent supportive housing, to uniformly define programs and services offered to our homeless population. It will align our performance metrics for programs funded through CHSP with HUD metrics utilized by the COC, as was requested by the County Commission back in February. So what this means is now programs funded in this proposed category would be required to report on performance based on the COC system performance metrics, such as the length of time a person remains homeless. This data will be collected, tracked, and reported through HMIS regarding CHSP funding. We'll be able to evaluate the effectiveness of the programs, CHSP funds for homelessness, and work with the agencies along with the COC to make any necessary adjustments. The data would be shared with the citizen review teams of the homeless service category as part of its deliberation on funding recommendations to the county and city commissions, respectively. And speaking of the citizen review teams, it will be staffed by the county, city, as well as the COC. The COC will make recommendations for appointments to the citizen review team to ensure that team members are familiar with the homeless service programs and are evaluating performance metrics when making funding recommendations. As for the funding of the next 2-year funding cycle, which will begin in FY23, it is also recommended that the existing CHSP funding for homeless services be shifted into this new category in the amount of $797,193, which is consistent with what we're doing right now for FY21. And as mentioned earlier, the COC is working with us as far as this recommendation to allocate $3.75 million of one-time ARPA funding to the category, which would be approximately $1.5 million per year for the next 2-year funding cycle. And the funding would be allocated exclusively for diversion and prevention, as well as permanent supportive housing, as has already been approved by the County and City Commission back in May. So What will the establishment of this new category and the significant funding mean to the homeless continuum in our community? It means an increased network of agencies doing work to end homelessness in Tallahassee, Leon County. Right now, there are only 7 agencies that receive HUD and/or DCF funding for homeless services, and many of them are at capacity. In working with Amanda and COC, they've advised we need about 20 to 30 agencies to meet the goals and targets that's been set in the strategic plan. We've got 50 agencies in CHSP. And additional funding for diversion and prevention, as well as permanent supportive housing, is expected to attract many of those agencies, as well as new agencies, to participate in the homeless services category and potentially make these agencies eligible for future long-term funding. And so that brings me to the other benefit with this recommendation, and that's additional, sustainable, and recurring federal funding. HUD loves, encourages, and awards communities with funding that align their homeless resources and meet the required system performance metrics like we're proposing today. With the consolidation of homeless service programs into this new category and the one-time funding that would be allocated, new agencies will administer programs that will improve access to the homeless population and track data and performance metrics that will make them highly competitive for future permanent HUD funding. The homeless service category means continued improvement to our homeless continuum, and that's why it's recommended by county and city today. And as Amanda will share in more detail, potentially, the COC has also indicated that it intends to shift its federal and state funding to CHSP under this proposed category long-term. This would truly be a game changer for our community in terms of coordinating and collaborating resources. As was presented earlier, all federal and state homeless dollars that are provided in our community has to go through the COC. The awards are streamlined through the COC. So shifting COC funding to CHSP under this new homeless service category would better integrate all homeless services programs in Tallahassee and Leon County through a single funding source for local, state, and federal dollars to address the highest homeless needs in our community. For the agencies, it would reduce redundancy and the frequency in which they must apply for homeless services funding, which can be as much as 3 times in a year. But all this shift would potentially occur in FY 2025, so we got time. For now, though, the ARPA fundings that I presented would be distributed over the next 2 to 3 years and are within the timeline of expending funds for the federal legislation. I'll wrap up with a breakdown of how ARPA funding would be allocated and distributed over the next few years. This table illustrates the ARPA allocations that I talked about, again, that were approved by the county and city commissions for homeless services. The column to the furthest right shows the total of approximately $6.2 million of the ARPA funds that are being invested into homelessness. And the 3 middle columns represent how the funds would be allocated as proposed in your workshop items, which of course is $1.7 million to our homeless shelter providers. That includes Kearney Center, Hope Community, Cabot City Youth Services, and Refuge House, which again has already been approved by the county and city commissions. $1.4 million to the COC for street outreach, permanent supportive housing, neighborhood-based partner capacity building, and coordination and support with the CHSP homeless service category, and $3.75 million in one-time funding for the new homeless services category under CHSP. Commissioners, to conclude, staff's recommendations as provided in your workshop item are presented now on the screen, and we'd be happy to answer any questions following public comments.
Excellent.
Mayor?
Abena, Amanda, Shinkton, thank you. Wonderful presentation. Colleagues, now that we're all on the same page with the public with that great presentation, we're going to take public comment. So members of the public that are here to testify, we're going to take testimony specifically on this agenda item only first. As always, Mr. Chairman, I like to start off our public comment by asking every member who's here to testify before the joint body, help us set the gold standard in positive, respectful civic engagement and show the world on how it's done right here in Leon County, City of Tallahassee. When the clerk calls your name, if you'll please approach the podium right here, state your name, your address, and you'll have 3 minutes to testify on this issue. So with that, Mr. Clerk, how many speakers do we have on this agenda item?
Mayor, we've got about 8 or 9 on this item, and we do have one connected remotely, and I'll check and see if it's this topic or another topic as we're going.
Wonderful. Let's go ahead and begin.
Our first speaker will be Robin Hassler Thompson, and then Chuck White.
Thank you so much for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robin Hassler Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center, a local anti-trafficking agency here in Tallahassee, Leon County. My address is 3703 Bovenbrook Way in Tallahassee, 32312.
You may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And I'm overwhelmed by this presentation. It was really great, and thank you so much. You might know that anyone who is a victim of human trafficking may have great vulnerabilities or does have great vulnerabilities, and very often that includes homelessness. One of the things, if there's one thing I'd like to leave you with today is, first of all, to let you know that we overwhelmingly support the recommendations of this report and the findings. We'd also like to say that there probably is not a single provider of homeless services now, whether it's shelter, rapid rehousing, refuge house, any program that hasn't included and hasn't helped a survivor of human trafficking. And that could be sex or labor trafficking. The other thing that I want to emphasize with you is that one of the things that traffickers do when they seek out the vulnerable is they make a lot of promises. One of the things that we see quite often is the vulnerability of people. And with that vulnerability, trafficker of homelessness or being unhoused, traffickers make those promises, and they promise them housing, clothing, a job, a place to work. They might promise them education, travel, all things. That's part of the lure and the trust building of traffickers. So again, if there's one thing I want to share with you today is if we don't meet the challenges of the unhoused and homeless, traffickers will, and they do. And one of the things they also do is they threaten to withdraw that support if it's not there otherwise. So one of the best ways to fortify our community is truly to address this issue of homelessness as well as other vulnerabilities. So I also want to share with you, since the pandemic, our caseload at STAC has tripled. We've seen greater economic vulnerability. We've seen greater vulnerability among those who were already vulnerable for health or economic reasons. We assist youth. We assist people who are U.S. citizens, who are undocumented, as well as people who are in any form of labor or sex trafficking. We have had great trouble finding housing. We think that there does need to be increased activity in this area, and we know that anytime you do address vulnerability, what you see is you address human trafficking.
You have just a few seconds remaining.
Thank you. The number one way to address human trafficking is to build awareness and education in our community on how to respond. So I'd like to conclude by actually acknowledging the work today of, I hope, the Leon County Commission, where they will be hearing a proposal on how our business community can address human trafficking by providing exact education tailored to Leon County on the issue of human trafficking for our business community. We really look forward to having that program discussed today, later this afternoon, because again, the number one way to address human trafficking is to help everyone, social services,
You're at 3
businesses.
minutes.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead
to
and
address
finish
this
your
issue.
thought, please.
Okay, so I was just going to conclude by saying again, building awareness, helping people all around our community, and I'm thinking about a lot of the initiatives you've outlined here to help people to be able to recognize and appropriately respond to this crime and to this human services and this human rights issue. So thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
Next is
Clerk.
Chuck White, and then Karen Woodall.
Thanks for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning. My name is Chuck White. My address is 537 Frank Shaw Road here in Tallahassee. I'm a 50-year resident of Tallahassee and been working in the field of homelessness as an avocation for about 3 decades. I wanted to just say a couple of comments. I want to say that in the document that y'all received, it gives a background, it's great background, but there was one inaccuracy. On page 22, it indicates that Kearney Center suspended services, direct services to clients, and that wasn't true. Through the HELP program, we were able to get bunches of people together and visit the hotel sites on a scheduled basis, and did that every day of the week, and did that for the entire time until the clients were moved back to the Kearney Center. So I want to say I operate the program called Help Florida. It's an employment program. I want to say to all of you, there's plenty of jobs out there for people. Send them to us. We can get people work. On the total package, the idea of manufactured housing, of modular housing, of mobile homes and trailers was not brought up. And I think it needs to be one of the tools in the toolbox that we use to solve our housing and homeless issues. So I want to bring that to your attention. I want to indicate that I believe, and I'm sure I'm going to get kickback on this one, I believe we need to establish a legal campground for our folks that are living in the woods and try to get them into a situation where we can require them to come to a specific spot where they can access services, have bathrooms, have showers, and we have some control over the situation and legally camp and not have to worry about getting thrown out. I want to tell you that with as far as this program goes that's being proposed, that the amount of overhead that agencies expend on grant applications is phenomenal. And reducing that is a big issue, something that can save everybody money. I want to finally end up by telling you that because of the COVID situations and the requirements of spacing, the limitations on the number of people that can access Kearney Center, for example, what I'm seeing anecdotally is a significant increase in unhoused individuals. I think we need to address it. God bless you, and thank you for your service to our community.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, our next speaker, please.
Karen Woodall, and then Barney Bishop.
Ms. Woodall, thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
And thank you all for discussing this issue and being so diligent about it. I'm Karen Woodall. My address is 603 North Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. That's my organizational address, which I'm using because that's the reason I'm here. I want to start out by just thanking everybody for the presentation, for the work, everybody who's in this room who works so diligently to address this issue all the time, every day. It's critical, it's important. I generally work on a state level with policy issues at the Capitol. I've worked on homelessness forever. I was involved with getting the first emergency assistance for those at risk of homelessness back in the 1980s. So that's been my perspective and approach. But now I have a training center. I'm smack dab in the middle of lots of people coming through who are in need of services and who are homeless. I support everything that was in that recommendation, by the way. I want to add a little because I think we do have to be bold and be very innovative. I'm coming across people who will not go into a shelter. They will not go into a congregate living facility. They've come from abuse. They don't trust anybody. They'd rather be outside than be in a place where they have to be around a whole lot of other people. So I do think it's important that we consider how to help them be safe and be in a place that makes sense. In doing some research, I came across some great innovative programs that I sent around to all of you, but I want to speak to them because there's two partners that haven't really been engaged here, and there's programs happening around the country. One is hospitals who are engaging in transitional housing, supportive housing, because of the repeat folks who come into their emergency rooms who are homeless. They come in for mental health issues, for just they can't take their meds, and they have found that it is cheaper and more effective to engage in creating their own supportive housing that people can go to from their emergency rooms with the goal of getting them out within 21 days into permanent housing, permanent supportive housing. And this is happening around the country. And an incentive was, under the Affordable Care Act, hospitals are dinged for repeat folks coming in. So they started looking on how to be more creative. It's something that I hope moving forward we can explore with our hospitals here, because there are models all over the country and it's working. And it's saving money and it's keeping people off of the streets and helping them with services. All of these things, both things I'm going to talk about, take everybody in the community being involved and supportive.
You're at almost 3 minutes.
The second area, and in the articles I sent you, it details where those programs are going on, is about addressing homeless people who end up in our criminal justice system, people who are arrested because they're trespassing. They end up at the jail. They're arrested because they're having a mental health outbreak and there's nowhere else for them to go. They end up at the jail. There are some innovative programs where sheriffs have taken cells at the jail and created rooms with, put a door on it instead of bars, put a bed, have air conditioning, have a television. Instead of putting people who come into the jail into the criminal justice system, they're putting them in that housing and providing services and working to move them into more supportive services. It's happening around the country. It saves money, and it's helping people with what they really need help with. And in fact, there is a program going on in Miami-Dade County that has been innovative with some of this kind of stuff that Judge Leifman, who works on mental health issues for years, has created.
You're past the 3-minute mark.
So I'm just putting these out there to move forward on and incorporate into our thinking about how to really be innovative on a number of these programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bishop, your name and address for the record. Mr. Clerk, who will be speaking after Mr. Bishop?
Tony Grippa.
That name sounds familiar. Mr. Bishop, good to see you, sir.
Good morning. My name is Barney Bishop. I live at 2215 Thomasville Road. I sent all of y'all a Florida Smart Justice Alliance email this morning, and I understand some of you read it, so I really appreciate that. I know I sent it early this morning. I'm here to represent Florida Smart Justice Alliance, but also been working for the last 6 months with the Mahan area neighbors. So I want to tell you that your staff recommendations are right on point. Please accept them. Number two, I want to tell you that the Big Bend Continuum of Care is doing an excellent job, and you should support everything that they want to do. And I'd like to share with you some key facts. 75% of all the people that are homeless are there because they have a mental health or substance abuse issue. Been working for 29 years as a state lobbyist on behavioral health care, substance abuse, and mental health. If we don't treat them, they're going to recidivate. They're going to do the same things over and over again. So we have to provide services. The money that the Continuum and your staff is talking about is a good start. It's not going to be enough, but please allocate it and please use it, because if you don't use it, then you're not going to have the opportunity to change these folks. 80% of the people that are homeless in this community don't live here, and they didn't live here before they became homeless. They live someplace else. They've come here because we've built a dream, the Kearney Center, and it was done right, and as a result, people want to come here. But we need to have tough love, but with compassionate enforcement, and that's going to be the key to what you want to do. 10 to 15%, and Karen just mentioned this, and she and I have known each other for decades, 10 to 15% of the people don't want structure. They don't want to be any place other than in the woods. You have to have an ordinance that says you can't do that. And if you have a homeowner that's letting them do that, then they have to sign perhaps an affidavit in your ordinance that says they're going to make sure that there's no needles, that there's no trash, that there's no food, that there's a toilet and a shower for them to stay in. And if not, then you punish the homeowner for letting that happen after they said they wouldn't let it happen. You have to get people out of the woods. The first gentleman that testified talked about tent camps. I know it sounds tough, but it works in Denver, Colorado. They put all the homeless people into tents on an asphalt parking lot. They congregate them in rows so that they can provide the services they need, the food that they need, do a head count, make sure that everybody's healthy. Consider that. It's an inexpensive way to provide some transient housing.
You're at 2.5?
Your solutions, we're looking at homeless shelters. What we're really talking about, folks, are sex offenders, ex-felons. Those are the ones that neighbors are concerned about. 5 solutions. Future siting of homeless shelters right now. Be thinking about where it's going to be. Nobody wants to live where a site is going to be in the future, and once you site it, nobody's going to put a neighborhood around it. But trying to put a site where a neighborhood isn't going to work. 2, you need more money. I've already covered that. 3, job training. You have to train these people with some jobs if you want them to change their lifestyle. You have to do it according to the skills they have, but there are jobs they can do. 4, how do you handle individuals that don't want to be institutionalized? And number 5, tough love, compassion, but with tough enforcement of the law. People come because they think that we're lax on enforcement of the law and property crimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Tony Grippa, and then Kirsten Olsen.
Former County Commissioner Tony Grippa, welcome back to the City Commission chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been 16 years, actually, since I've been in this chamber, and I don't think I've missed anything going on here. I'm here on a very important issue. First, let me thank the staff. That was just I know how much research goes into this. I know how much hard work, the COC, the city, and the county. Fabulous presentation, very thoughtful. And I want to thank the elected officials, the city and county commissioners, because, look, you all are willing to take a stand against a very important issue in our community, and you're willing to take the time and make sure you do it right. I'm here today just as an individual. I was invited to sit on the Carney Center board. I am very passionate, and you can tell I'm a little bit nervous, believe it or not, about the homeless issue. I don't think people come here, in all deference to my friend Barney Bishop, to seek homeless services. I don't think there's a Taj Mahal at the Carney Center. I think there's an innovative way to give somebody basic food, shelter, and then a hand up to permanent housing. And what people don't want to talk about is the fact that a citizen, Rick Carney, has actually paid the bill, okay? Tens of millions of dollars has been paid by one individual. In my opinion, that's a failing on the business community. That's a failure of me, quite candidly. I'm going to be way more involved. But I think it's something that local government has to look at. One thing I do agree with my friend Barney Bishop is the funding needs to be more. The Carney Center, I've been through the numbers. It needs a permanent funding source. It needs a sustainability plan. It needs dollars from the city and county. And you can ask Alan Rosenzweig, because I used to meet him at 7:30 a.m. during budget season. If you need help finding that money and prioritizing it, I can help find it. Because the budgetary process is prioritization. How much money are you spending on other things as compared to basic human need? Food, shelter, mental health, etc. I would tell you it's woefully underfunded in this community. And where I think the change is occurring is right here and right now. And I commend each one of you for your leadership in looking at this important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Mr. Clerk.
Kirsten Olsen, followed by Sylvia Smith.
Ms. Olsen, thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please. Commissioner Grippa, we do need your address. If you'll make sure you fill out a card if you haven't, for the record.
I have the card, Mayor.
Excellent. Thank you.
Uh-oh.
Hint, hint.
I heard Commissioner Grippa say that the county needs to find extra money. Ms. Olsen, I'm sorry, it's your time.
Hello, my name is Kirsten Olsen, and I live at 1225 Talbot Avenue, Tallahassee, Florida, in Greater Brant Hills. I'm also a member of the Mahan Area Neighbors and Businesses. Thank you for all you do to make Tallahassee and Leon County a great place to live. I'm here because I have recent firsthand experience with the homeless issue, with the surprise opening of the low-barrier City Walk Shelter half a mile from my house. It does not have a permit to operate, but continues to anyway, and even recently had a death at the facility. This is impacting our neighborhood in many ways that I'll not go into here, but suffice to say that my neighbors and I understand the seriousness of this issue and the necessity to come up with meaningful and professional solutions. I was disappointed that the documents today did not include ideas on how the city, county, Big Bend Continuum of Care, and other groups can work with neighborhoods on citing homeless services. I would like to suggest the creation of a way to inform neighborhoods and get meaningful input from neighborhoods. The format could incorporate elements from the Neighborhood Bill of Rights and the city's recently passed compatibility ordinance. I would also like to see a more proactive stance from the get-go on getting treatment for homeless persons struggling with multiple issues. According to SAMHSA, the Federal Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, about 38% of homeless people were dependent on alcohol, 26% abused other drugs, and about 25% of homeless suffer from mental illness. Further complicating the picture is that some homeless have felony criminal records or sex crimes convictions. According to a study on shelter residents in San Diego, only 10% of the residents there had a job. In addition, the BBCOC reports more than 30% of homeless who are placed in housing return to homelessness at some point. With all these difficult situations, targeted supports need to commence immediately. Locations for facilities should be selected for certain populations to minimize impacts on existing neighborhoods, schools, and businesses. Neighborhoods should also receive additional support if needed. Shelters do not appear to be regulated in Florida, even though they deal with vulnerable populations. Some cities have created their own ordinances for safe operation and inspection of shelters, and we should consider doing that too. As part of those regulations, we should create a certification plan with training standards for people who work with this population. Lastly, millions of our dollars are being spent on these services. I would suggest the city and county establish an independent auditing and disclosure framework for making sure that the services are delivered efficiently and effectively as promised to taxpayers. Regarding information sharing, the Tallahassee-Leon County Homelessness Dashboard is a step in the right direction. But to those of us at the neighborhood level, much of the information is just not very useful. I appreciate you listening to my comments and for the time you're devoting to this issue. Thank you.
Ms. Olsen, thank you. Mr. Clerk, our next speaker.
Next is Sylvia Smith, and then Amber Tynan.
Good morning, Commissioners. It is a real pleasure to be in person with you after so long, and thanks to staff who have prepared these recommendations in the background. We certainly support the concepts of coordination and the COC's involvement in the CHSP process. We think that you're going to see a great benefit from adopting all of the recommendations. It is absolutely true what Shinkton said about HUD's view of coordination between the COC, the city, and the county. This can lead to greater leveraging of federal recurring dollars in the future. So that's our experience. Our COC competes fairly well in the federal system, and if you enact these, we're going up in the ranks nationally, and that's going to secure recurring dollars. One of the critical pieces of recurring dollars that we currently have that is inadequate is for the most vulnerable persons, which are the people served in permanent supportive housing. But I actually want to change from my prepared notes and comment on two things because no one has brought them up yet. The system in homelessness addresses the most vulnerable and those with substance use disorders and mental illness through a very critical, principled approach, and that is housing first. We you need to be aware that you do not want to coerce individuals into services in order to be housed. And that's important for us all to stand firm on because it's very natural for people to want to link those things together. But what works is simply adequately staffing permanent supportive housing caseloads, rental assistance for those persons who are coming into the system with multiple co-occurring disabilities. It's not just substance use and mental illness. It's chronic orthopedic illnesses, disorders. It's chronic high blood pressure. It's chronic diabetes, multiple medical issues. And we're currently serving that population with caseload ratios of something like 1 to 55 in permanent supportive housing, the most vulnerable folks. So we are at capacity, as someone mentioned earlier. It's very challenging. But that's the service that ends chronic homelessness permanently. If there's a permanent source of subsidy for rent as people come in and out, not a lot of people leave that system because they are receiving $723 of SSDI or SSI, and they need subsidies and case management long-term has been our experience. Two other quick points. The concept of informed consent is very important, and we really come to advance that. When we talk about people choosing to stay X or Y place, just please be aware that what's required in human services is for us to label someone as having rejected a choice. They have to, first of all, the choice has to be available that they've rejected.
You're right at 3 minutes.
Thank you. They also have to have seen the choice and know what it is before they can reject it. So until we build the system, we can't be sure who's choosing not to enter it. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Smith. Mr. Clerk, next speaker, please.
Amber Tynan, and then Stanley Sims, who I believe is the last person in chambers, but we do have a couple of virtual connections.
Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Absolutely. Amber Tynan, 2477 Tim Gamble Place, 32308. Apologies in advance for my voice. Mayor, Chairman, Commissioners, appointed officials, I represent United Partners for Human Services. We are a membership organization comprised of over 170 human service agencies with a long-standing partnership with both the city and the county, working to enhance the capacity of our human services sector. I'm here today to speak in support of the Big Bend Continuum of Care, a partner of ours, and their role in coordinating homelessness services in our community, as well as commend the enhanced partnership they've established with the city and the county over the last few months, and especially since the onset of the pandemic. They are the only entity that can draw down funds from HUD through COC competitions, state-issued homelessness funds, youth demonstration funds, meaning there is an immense value in their continued coordination of local efforts directly with the COC. At present, as you heard, they only administer 9% of the funding currently dedicated to homelessness services, and we believe greater coordination of available funding will only positively impact outcomes specific to homelessness locally. UPHS supports the goals and objectives outlined in their strategic plan, which was included in your packet. And to accomplish this, UPHS agrees that we must increase the availability of affordable housing stock, especially for those individuals who are extremely low income, and prioritizing units for individuals with homeless histories. Beyond today's workshop, UPHS encourages the city and the county to establish a cohesive inclusionary housing policy that will result in the greater number of affordable housing units developed, thus setting a standard for all new housing developments that could dedicate a minimum of 10% of newly developed units be available for those exiting homelessness and require they pay no more than 30% of their monthly income. Further, additional recurring PSH funding for permanent housing and supportive services must be a priority, and commitment to achieve the goal of reaching that functional zero among veterans and chronically homeless households. As recommended, UPHS wholeheartedly supports the recommendation and creation of an 11th category within CHSP for homeless services, where we designate existing agency funding as well as one-time ARPA funding to greater coordinate and leverage use of funds. That said, we look forward to working with both the city, county, and COC in identifying long-term funding options to maintain necessary programming and services beyond the next CHSP cycle once ARPA funding is expended so that we can achieve the greatest maximum impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sims, thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Stanley Sims. I'm at 1320 Avondale Way. And I've come to find out from experience, sleeping in a tent on the northeast side is just as uncomfortable as sleeping in a tent on the south side. Outside is outside. And to say that these people are not from here. Were they Japanese? Russians? Where were they from? Or is it okay to be an American outside of and not a Floridian? If you're not a Floridian, it's okay to come to Florida and be homeless. Well, let's get some preventative measures. First, the city could be a leader and pay all of their city employees $15 an hour. Because guess what? That will prevent them from sleeping in their cars. Drive by the Walmart on Costco's. I've got 5 that sleeps over there in the morning time when I go get my coffee. It's hard to ignore sometimes. See, Moses slept with Pharaoh and with his brothers and sisters, but he had to have awakening. And let me say this for my time run out. I congratulate this staff. Mr. Shington, I ain't gonna mess your name up, honey. Because what this pandemic did to them is open our eyes to the true level of how our citizens are suffering. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Now, is your work over? No. But you've done one hell of a job. And I don't often say that a lot. So I defend this. And what we don't talk about, how crime links to homelessness, is when they can't go home, they join gangs. And if they can't join gangs, they become QAnon people. And they can't become QAnon people, they become them racist organizations, Atilius and Abilius, not Black Lives Matter. Because they're fighting for equal justice under the law in a lawful manner. So if we want to stop some homelessness here, let's pay the people. Pay the people. Respect the people. They are people.
You're at almost 3 minutes.
We, the people. I got white brothers and sisters that picks me up when I fall down, sir. Just because I'm pro-black don't make me anti-white.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, our next speaker.
I do have a speaker card for Jeremy Block, but I believe the topic on that one is Orange Avenue redevelopment, which will be our next item. So let me go to our WebEx speakers. Sarah Teresa Haskell will be our first.
Ms. Haskell, are you with us?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Your name and address for the record, please. Thank you for your patience, and you have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sarah Teresa Haskell. I live at 923 Alachua Avenue, and I've lived in Tallahassee for 65 years. Please bear with me. I'm not a public speaker. First, I want to thank the BBCOC for all its devoted work with homeless clients. This housing presentation today has been done very concisely. Unfortunately, I have concerns. Housing gets pushed first due to the issues named homeless. This approach, however, has proven not to work. What has proven to work is tough love with compassion, a balance of enforcing our laws and treatment first programs. I didn't hear either component mentioned in this report and/or any money allocated for them. Housing is a component of homeless care. Permanent housing can be used as incentives. Homelessness is a human problem, not a housing problem. Placing homeless clients in housing untreated fails. It cultivates bad problems for the community and produces destruction of the communities. It transfers the dysfunction of the street to subsidized apartment complexes. Points that I think should be considered. Outsiders must go back from where they come from. Our homeless who do not follow our laws and rules must go elsewhere. Parameters, structure, and accountability must be woven into the approach for care of the homeless client. The community and its citizens should matter too in decision making. It bothers me tremendously that our federal government is sending COVID relief money for housing only, when it has been proven housing alone fails. Is the federal government setting us up to fail and become like California and Portland? Each of you have an opportunity to choose approach to managing homelessness. It may require us contacting places like Houston, Texas, or the University of Alabama in Birmingham and researching their steps for managing homeless clients. Why not build a proven system that works? We can be an example for other cities in our state. Common sense and following proven data goes a long way. An example is, and very currently, is Florida not locking down our state. Data was followed. Common sense was used. Another one, stopping unemployment payments from the federal government to get people back to work. Common sense. Remember, the relief money from the federal government is sending us is our money. It is increasing our national debt, the debt that our children will have to pay back. Common sense goes a long way. I appreciate all of y'all's work on this matter. This is a very complex problem. I thank you for your allowing me to speak today, and I thank you for all the work you do. It is in your hands how our city moves forward in taking care of this problem, and whether we do well or we do not do well. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, our next speaker.
The next speaker is Janice Richardson, and this is the last speaker we have either in person or virtually for this item.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Richardson, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I'm trying to get my video, but I can't, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
Sue Richardson.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, Sue Richardson, 412 Chestnut Drive. I'm in Inglewood neighborhood, and we are members of that group, the Mahan Area Neighbors. The speakers that have come before me, Barney and Sarah Teresa and Kirsten, have spoken eloquently, I think, to our position on this issue. So I would only like to add one or two things. When I review the excellent report that you've just been given from the Big Bend Continuum of Care and the staff recommendations, I notice that it's predominantly concerned with what I call the carrot approach, funding approach, to try to draw people in and provide for new neighborhood or new agencies to come in to help with the homeless. But there doesn't seem to be the stick as well, which I think prior speakers have spoken to. The need for ordinances or certifications and requirements that anyone working in Leon County and City of Tallahassee toward homelessness or providing homelessness services be a part of the Big Bend Continuum of Care group so that the data can be there. Funding is tied to data. If you can't get the data because these agencies are going it alone, they're not connected, they're not part of, and they're not attracted by the carrot you offer, they have their own funding sources, then you have outside providers and you lose the data. And you lose that coordinated approach that I sense that the Joint Commission is going for. So I think having ordinances that can be enforced that require the new agencies coming into this group is going to be critical. And making it an enforceable, an injunction type action and cause of action for the city or the county to take care of. That would be my basic recommendation tied to everyone else. Now, I did submit a short or brief statement that included 4 possible ordinances that the city could begin working with its group, Big Bend Continuum of Care, and its excellent staff that have put together this incredible proposal here and staff report. So I just want to say that I agree with what's happened. I certainly support the efforts that the city and the county are doing and putting forward here today, and the comments that have been made. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, one more time, do we have any other public comment on this item?
No, sir, Mayor, but I will add that we did receive some written comments, as was just referenced by the last speaker, and those comments were received and will be made part of the record and obviously available to both city and county commissioners if you haven't already seen them.
Excellent. And I want to thank everybody that came out today to participate in this workshop and to testify. In a second, I would like to ask Shinkton and Amanda and Abena if you feel moved to comment or add any information to anything that you might have heard or clarify anything that you might have heard. I'll come back in just a second. So colleagues, this is the one item that we have that has action today. We have 3 recommended options before us, 1, 2, and 3. This is a joint workshop of the city of the county. This is not the intergovernmental agency. My goal is to bring, after great discussion and questions and comments, bringing it into one motion that we can both agree upon, which then will have a formal vote by the city commission and a formal vote by the county commission, Mr. Chair. With that, with my comments, again, thank you very much for all the hard work that y'all have done. I think we all recognize that this is Amanda said, game changer, but it's not the end. We have a lot of work that we need to do. But for what is presented before us today, I do support options 1, 2, and 3, and I look forward to hearing from my colleagues on their comments and suggestions as well. With that, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Before we move on, Commissioners, I was informed that Vice Chair Proctor has joined us virtually. So if there'd be a motion to approve his participation virtually in this meeting, I'd appreciate it.
Second.
All right, motion's been made by Commissioner Dozier and seconded by Commissioner Maddox. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Commissioner Welch, are you with us, sir? All right.
Yes, sir. I'm fine with that. Thank you.
All right. So,
Go ahead.
so Commissioner Welch, you voted aye. Is that correct?
Yes, aye.
Okay. So the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Vice Chair Proctor, welcome, sir. All right. First in the speaker's queue on the county side, I've got Commissioner Dozier.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to run it. I'm calling you for comment.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Personal
Great.
comments.
All right. Let's see. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank staff. You all did a tremendous job. You know, we're very proud of having you and your teams here. The work shows. The work really shows. And I also want to thank Amanda and everyone at the Big Bend Continuum of Care. As the county representative for the COC board, I see people working in action, and I see that, and I want to thank everyone for all their hard work. You know, Ms. Wander and I have talked about this before. I've heard, many of us have heard anecdotes from law enforcement and residents about the number of people that come from outside our county, outside our region, that are struggling with homelessness. We hear all different types of reasons for that, you know, about the safety net that exists here to support them. But we didn't really know to what extent that portion was. We didn't know how large that population coming from outside our region into our region really was. I had asked Ms. Wander this earlier, and then we talked about it again yesterday, and she shared with me some real data that I've seen for the first time that shows the percentage of folks coming from outside our region, outside our county, into this area that are struggling with homelessness. And so the data that she showed me showed that from January 2018 to May 30th, 2021, so it's about a 3.5-year window, about roughly 6,000 people have come through the COC system. And of that 6,000 people, counterintuitively, only 6% come from the 7 counties surrounding Leon County. Only 6% of that 6,000. However, 22% of that 6,000 over the last 3.5 years have come from outside our region into the COC 8-county area. So I bring this up because it's something that's important for us to understand. The folks that come into our region, that come into Leon County from outside, they need support. They need help just like the folks that live here do. But we need to think about what that means for us in terms of our strategic plan going forward and how are we going to support those folks, whether we prioritize folks that live here, that originate from here. How do we make sure that the taxpayer dollars that people are providing to the city and the county for homelessness support, how does that funding get allocated? So I bring that up because that's an important part. I know we've all talked about it to varying degrees, but for the first time, we have data. 22% over the last 3.5 years of the people that are struggling with homelessness come from outside our region. Ms. Wander, do you have any comments about that? I probably killed that horse, but.
No, I just wanted to mention that we've had more than 6,000 people come through the system. Okay. Those are 6,000 people who provided information about their county of origin.
There were 16% of that. The way I looked at the data, there was 16% that we didn't have any data for.
Yeah, that it was inconclusive.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I just want to point that out. I think it's important for us to consider as we move forward, not just from this workshop, but over the coming years. One thing I wanted to ask staff and Ms. Wander about was whether you readily knew of any communities in this country that are maybe a few years ahead of us when it comes to tackling homelessness issues, communities that are similar to ours, maybe in demographics and size, and et cetera, that have had goals similar to the ones that we specify in this new strategic plan that a few years ago were right where we are right now. And then they had the funding to achieve those goals. I wanted to see if you knew of anything off the top of your head that basically we can point to a community in this country and say, they were where we were 3 or 4 years ago. They had the funding, they committed themselves to the funding, and here's where they were able to make progress on those goals that they listed in their strategic plan. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I kind of am. You have any communities that you can think of off the top of your head? Any golden examples of a community that got it right and communities that can help lay the path for us to follow?
Ms. Wander.
So, we love to be unique here, and we are very unique. Of the 27 COCs in Florida, we're the largest, geographically speaking. We have 8 counties. A lot of COCs are 1 county. So we have a bit of a different lay of land than most. We do not know of any COCs in Florida that are kind of, ahead of where we are in regards to coordinating our strategic plan with the local COC and governments. We talk pretty regularly with the Florida COCs. We don't do a ton of networking with other COCs across the nation. And so that's something we can definitely look into. I think there might be some other COCs in other states that are considered balance of state and have multiple counties. That would be a good model for us to look at.
Mr. Chairman, what Amanda is saying is that other communities want to be like us. That's what she's saying. Because I'll be totally honest, that is something that I've talked to my counterparts in other counties. We don't see a lot of coordination with their COCs, unfortunately. I think what we're doing today and some of the recommendations that we're bringing today is very bold, as Amanda mentioned earlier, and I think it's putting us on the right track of where we're trying to go to prevent homelessness in our community.
Yeah, I would, Commissioner, echo that. And what I've seen is communities that have had opportunities to make tremendous progress in a particular area. And what we've done in our community, I think over the last 12 to 18 months, is seize the opportunity with new funding. For example, we've talked about Housing First. That's a strategy that has been tested to be effective. It simply works. We may not have had enough resources directed at it, but this is the first time we've targeted it with rapid rehousing. We've seen communities talk about a functional zero, and what that means is we won't ever end homelessness, as in it will never happen, but we have such a well-oiled machine that when somebody experiences homelessness, their time in it is really short, and they have a pathway of exiting to permanent housing. So that coordinated entry, which I would prefer to say coordinated exit, is literally agencies sitting around the table like this, almost bi-weekly, if I'm not mistaken now, where they're going client by client, and they're saying, where is Joe so-and-so how ready is he for housing tomorrow, next week? Where are we with the landlord? How can we pair them up? That didn't used to happen in this community that I'm aware of, and it's starting to happen now. So I really think we're in such a good position. It's not to say we're done at all. It is to say that we have a structure in place finally. We have the attention and the resources in place, and we could really do something that sets us up well.
That's great. Thank you. And Mr. Mayor. Yeah. Thank you very much. I used to develop state policy for a living, and one thing that we always used to do is point to another state that was doing a policy similar to the one we were proposing, right? And say, they did this, they tried this, it's very similar to what we're proposing for your state, and it worked. Or if it didn't work, here are the reasons why, and here's how we can fix it, right? So in the business world, you get points by being innovative and bold, out ahead of everybody in terms of your thinking, because you increase your profits, you increase your market share, right? Government works a little bit differently in that, we're stewards of taxpayer dollars. So I want to be bold, I want to be innovative, I want to be out there and be the leader on this stuff, but I also have we all have a responsibility to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, especially at these numbers, right? So it's a bit, Mr. Ojitano, if pointing to successes that have been out there that are proven, that's really helpful. And Ms. Wander, yes, to the extent that we can point to other solutions that have been tried out there that work, I think that gives us additional confidence that with the amount of money we're spending, we know we're going to have some good results. Or we've been able to learn from the mistakes made by people that came before us. Real quick, just two more quick things. I don't want to take too much more time, but I know we aren't funding things at the level of what the new strategic plan calls for from the Big Bend COC. But Ms. Wander, you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. With the funding that we have, that's on the drawing board for today, how much progress does that allow us to make on the strategic plan between now and 2025?
I would say, as a whole, we would probably see that it will contribute about an eighth of what we need to have contributed over the next 4 to 5 years. Specifically with regards to permanent supportive housing, we have around 300 people annually who need that service. The money you're committing to permanent supportive housing will help us get 75 people housed. So there's still a big gap. And there's still a big gap such that you will not see the impact you want until we figure out as a group how to fill the gap.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, ma'am. I appreciate it. And the last point is, I want to thank Robin Hassler Thompson and the members of STAC for coming and working really hard on a proposal that the County Commission is going to be reviewing and deciding upon later this afternoon. I wanted to, the mayor and I have had some conversations, and I wanted to see if perhaps maybe the city might be interested in exploring the proposal that Robin Hassler Thompson and STAC have proposed. It's basically a community-specific training that would help deal with human trafficking. I don't want to put you on the spot right now, sir, but just wanted to kind of open up that conversation when you might be ready. It's something that the County Commission will be taking a look later this afternoon. And with that, Mr. Mayor, that concludes my remarks.
To clarify, we have not been having conversations. You brought the item to my attention. Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like...
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I have Commissioner Williams-Cox coming back to Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to be cognizant of our time because I know we have a hard stop, so I'm going to try to make my questions very succinct, and I hope my colleagues will help us in doing it because we do have a hard stop at noon. I've been honored to work with Big Bend Continuum Care as our city representative, and also working with Amanda and Abena, and also with Shinkton, because when issues come, people send messages to your phone or smoke signals or however they get it to you. And what I do is I send it to them, they make it happen, and we keep it moving. So I appreciate having that relationship serving in this capacity. And I also appreciate the recommendations, and I wholeheartedly support it. But we've come through some hard times to get to this point. And to come in here today singing Kumbaya is great. But I think the public needs to understand that we didn't arrive here just poof, we arrived here. There's been some hard work and some hard feelings and some hard words and many other things that have happened in our community that has gotten us to this point. And so I don't want us to gloss over all of that. It's great that we've come beyond that, but there are some facts, some things that we really need to know. And we've talked about this through these months. And one of the things that I wanted to, two questions I have. Amanda, the point in time count gives us, at that point in time, how many folks we were dealing with for homelessness. Because again, I want to frame our homelessness issue. So what did our point in time, and I know it's in here, but for those who are not gonna go in, give me the movie version of what are we talking about? How many people are we talking about?
Okay, and so the point in time count this year was conducted during the pandemic. So we do expect that some of the decrease in numbers is because of the outfall of the pandemic and being able to locate people. But we roughly have, an average of 700 people who are experiencing homelessness in this area on any given night. One of the other things to take into consideration is that we are Florida, we have beautiful weather, and we often see an increase in homelessness during different seasons. So January for us is not necessarily the highest volume. We typically see the summer months as being much higher. It is for one night. And overall, we typically see about 3,000 people experiencing homelessness, 3,000 unique individuals over a year's time.
Okay, so about 3,000 per year, 700 per night. Okay, so those are data points. We want to put that in perspective. The other thing I want to ask is, what is the current level of funding? Because I know that we've reported out on what the city has done, and I want to ask the county to point out on what they've done, and also what you're getting at the federal level. Because when we start talking about what our taxpayers are paying for, we got to also consider that there are federal dollars that come in here to help with this as well. So we are our brother's keeper, and we can't just put it on someone else. If they're here in our city, we're responsible for everybody who comes here. So, Abena, if you could give us the level of funding that the city has been providing, and Shinkton, if you can provide what the county has provided, and Amanda, you can tell us what the federal, because I think it's important to know how much money has already been invested by the source, and then as we walk towards where we're trying to get to, where we have a more coordinated funding and effort, I think it's important to know how these pieces have come together to make this whole.
Sure, I can begin, and we have some of that information on the dashboard. Last time, I think I presented to the City Commission, we shared a mix of our regular recurring funds as well as some of our CARES Act funding, which was put out immediately last year. In this fiscal year, we had about $3.8 million that the city allocated to homelessness-related services. In a typical year, right now, what we counted for city and the county funding is about $1.3 million of recurring funds. A lot of that comes through our CHSP process, and some of it is through direct allocation from the city's HUD allocation. So it's a small portion that we get from HUD. The majority, as has already been said, goes through the COC. And I can break it down even further. For the city, it's about just under $1 million from the city. We have about $377,000 from the county, and we have about $2.6 million that is administered by the COC, and then about $1.7 million that comes from other public sources, but flows perhaps directly to one of the service providers.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So over the past year, there was initial $300,000 that we provided, as I mentioned earlier, when we did the Community Relief Center, as well as in the non-congregate housing that we provide during COVID-19. We did $11.5 million in CARES funding for our individual assistance program, assisting people with their rent, mortgage, and utilities to ensure that they did not face homelessness, which was critical during the pandemic. We've done over $8 million thus far through our emergency rental assistance program to assist those who are facing evictions, and so that way they don't face evictions within their homes. We've done $2.1 million to our homeless service providers, as well as working with the continuum of care. And we've got additional dollars coming through ERA2, which is about $10 million that we're doing over the next several months to assist, continue. Again, this is kind of like homeless prevention, to ensure that people do not face any type of eviction or utility disruption over the next several months during this pandemic.
Ms. Wander, federal contribution?
So annually, the COC brings in about $1.7 million through HUD and $400,000 from DCF. That is in a normal year, non-pandemic, non-COVID funding. With the pandemic, we've been able to bring in a $1.7 million investment from DCF. On top of that, we didn't receive, there was no sort of additional COC HUD funding issued for the pandemic.
Okay, because I think it's important that what we've talked about going forward and talking about the CHSP process, which won't happen until 2023, but we've still got to do some things before we get there. And so I think it was important for our public to understand that we already have some skin in the game, some money's already being spent, and will continue to be spent while we walk towards these recommendations. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Dozier, followed by Commissioner Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pretty sure that's on. I'll get it a little closer there. Thank you all for a great presentation, and throughout you've referenced how much incredible work you've done since the beginning of the pandemic. I know that builds on the work you did before that, and lots of partners here in the room, agency folks, but also just community partners, neighborhoods, others, and I truly appreciate that. I think this has not only helped people during the pandemic, but it has elevated the issue, and like we hear throughout the nation, so many of us, the pandemic really illuminated a lot of challenges that we've had ongoing for years and helped build that coordination. And I think that's what we're seeing today is kind of a launching point of what we've learned over the years, but really what we've done in the last year and the focus of our community on this important issue. I appreciate the questions from my colleagues. I think the data about our very large region, most COCs do not look like our region, is important, and those who may come in from outside of our region, that those numbers were important, Commissioner or Mr. Chair, thank you. One thing that always stands out to me, whether we're talking about mental health, continuum of care, career source, our region has the largest territory, often with the least amount of funding, because it's based on population. That presents unique struggles for staff, for others, and a very diverse territory. So homelessness in Taylor County is not going to look like Leon County necessarily. So I think y'all have done a really great job presenting the information today. I think we've identified the needs. I appreciate the strategic plan. That will be an ongoing process, and reflecting on the data and working with our partners and with you all. My concern today is about the rapid, or how quickly we could expend funds. You all have done a lot of good work in the last year. Shanti, you just laid out an incredible amount of funding that was pushed out primarily through your office, OEV, others, over the last year to stand up those programs, connect with the community, and get that money out the door. I mean, $8 million in housing assistance already, that is substantial. And I know the city has done the same, as with most of our partners throughout the community. So this immediate infusion of money, emergency rescue money, is doing a lot of good in our community, not just pandemic relief, but addressing these long-term problems and issues, helping people build sustainable lives or get the permanent supportive housing they might need and other types of services. So with that, I really do agree with the goals here, that increased coordination helps us draw down additional funding. I mean, my time on the COC, I got an incredible education, and for Chair Minor, Commissioner Williams-Cox, I mean, your time, any one of us who serves on the COC, you really see the benefit of that coordination. So this is an important conversation that we're having, and from my perspective, something we've eagerly awaited over the years. So I think this is good. I loved your comment, Shannon, that others want to be like us. So that was a good interjection. Thank you. And Shannon, I'm going to come to you for this. That for Big Bend Continuum of Care, they are the organization that HUD and DCF identify. As Amanda said earlier, they're the only ones that can qualify for these dollars, apply for them, and they're reporting their internal metrics, how they've administered that program over the years is something that you've sat on the board, participated in, and you really find value in that process that they've developed over the years. Is that right?
Yes, and actually we worked well together because there were components that we saw that really work with CHSP that we were able to incorporate as part of their process also. But what's also impressive about their process, of course, the folks know the issues. I mean, they're identifying individuals who are well-versed in looking at our homeless service programs and looking at the metrics and being able to review the applications and review the process and making recommendations that eventually goes to the COC board.
And that is an ongoing process. I mean, we have staff through COC and those grant committees and other things. I mean, that happens every year when the notice of funding availability comes out through HUD, DCF, and you've seen that working well. And I think I heard you say they have incorporated some of the COC or CHSP methodology, I'll use that word, into their process at the COC. Is that right?
Yes, and actually some of the members, some of the folks that we really felt that were very impressive, who serve on our citizen review teams, we've shared that information with the COC so they can identify those individuals that also serve in those areas too. Because some people miss the annual CHSP process, so they always want to be able to get in there and review some applications, and so they have the opportunity with the COC during the time to look at HUD granting.
Okay. Well, that's something I had not heard before, so I appreciate you saying that you're already sending members from the citizen review over there. So that's great. I was going to ask also Commissioner Williams-Cox about the breakdown of current funding. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And just to clarify that, it's my understanding that a lot of the city funds, you mentioned the CDBG funds, there's also emergency services grants. A lot of that is funding that the city, not the county, would qualify for, but you pass it straight through to CHSP. And then there's some general funds, at least from the county, and are there general funds from the city as well put into the CHSP pool for
Yeah, absolutely.
homelessness?
We have, not specifically for homelessness, but the city puts over $2.3 million of general funds into the CHSP process.
Of that 797,000,
Yeah.
that's dedicated to homelessness, so that would be the CDBG and ESG funding dedicated to that pool?
No, it's mostly general fund dollars.
Mostly general funds,
from
okay.
the city and the county.
Okay, that was just one key point, and I think that is important that we do put in general funds from both local governments into that pool. So I don't need to ask any other questions because Commissioner Williams-Cox covered that, and you all did. Thank you. So for CHSP, we have an item up tonight for the County Commission, and I think the city will see it soon as well. We signed an MOU back in 2017 to go to the 2-year funding cycle, develop metrics, and revamp our categories, which have the 10 categories you mentioned. That has not changed in the last 20-plus years. Is that correct, Shannon?
Yes.
Okay. So the item we've got tonight, we're still going to be working on that for another year. So we don't have metrics necessarily. Agencies will apply for their specific program within children's service category or one of the other categories, and the teams vet that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we don't, they provide metrics. They're not uniform metrics.
Yes, sir.
But
Yes, sir.
they do provide metrics that they identify as far as reviewing. Though that information is shared with the citizen review teams as part of their deliberation for funding recommendations.
Okay. I did not mean to imply that our agencies do not have metrics, but we don't have uniform metrics within CHSP. That's something that we're working on with Askew School and others jointly with our city partners. Yes. Okay. So what I'm really getting to, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chair, is that it's my sense we have not put non-reoccurring dollars, recovery dollars, emergency dollars into the CHSP program in the past. The staff is phenomenal. They have a huge lift. It's every other year. And we're working on improving that system and adding those metrics in the future. So there's going to be foreseeably a lot of work for that CHSP staff going forward. On the other hand, we have a trusted agency, Big Bend Continuum of Care, who has been administering grants, meeting the metrics, and working with CHSP and our staff at City and County for years. With the American Rescue Plan dollars, I'm kind of concerned that we might wait to allocate those dollars until 2023, because with this model, with the new CHSP category, we would be putting that money into the process for next spring. Agencies would be applying for it next spring. City and county would approve it September 22, and contracts would be issued after that, beginning October 23. You're nodding, Shinton, so that's correct.
2022.
2022, I'm sorry, FY23, yes. So October 2022 and rolling out for the next 2 years. So with this model, we are delaying the disbursement of those dollars for over a year, for about 15 months at the very least. I understand the 1.4 million goes straight into street outreach immediately, but we've got challenges right now. We have incredible need. That number just stood out to me of 300 people needing permanent supportive housing beds, and we only, with the funding mandate, that was startling. 1/8 of the funding you would need to cover the strategic plan is covered in this. So to improve our coordination and meet those goals that all three of you laid out, to improve coordination so that we can identify more funding from state, federal, local, private sector, it seems like it would be in our interest to hit the ground running as quickly as possible. And we also have other issues coming. We have evictions that the moratorium. I hope our community is not looking like other communities because of the rental assistance that we've pushed out in the last couple of years. But we already have a demand. That's why the bed numbers for permanent supportive stood out to me. So my question, and I'm going to turn it to you, Amanda, is with additional staffing, which is contemplated within this proposal, but you would be working with CHSP, could Big Bend Continuum of Care administer the program kind of in with the same goals, the same format as what we're proposing for CHSP, but do that more quickly, start to roll out the dollars in the next fiscal year, in FY22, instead of waiting until FY23? And if you could do that, what might be the benefits of pushing that money out into the community to our providers in the next fiscal year instead of waiting another year?
Sure. So we absolutely could do that, but over time, we have to have kind of a staged approach. So of course, the day that we would be contracted with, we're not going to start putting people into housing because it takes some time to ramp up, get programs set, whatnot. So if we were to do that, our plan would be very similar to what's proposed already, in that we would invest in getting their outreach resources out immediately, some of the permanent supportive housing, and we would also do some of the capacity building with smaller nonprofits and faith-based organizations. That's where we would start. There might be a little additional flexibility and leverage if we did combine all of this opportunity for funding right now, and we were able to go into our HUD competition saying that we're going to do one big RFP, essentially, so that community organizations applying for homelessness funding don't have to go through a HUD competition, then a state competition, then a CHSP competition. We could also do that the other way through the CHSP process. And so there's a comment in the packet that says that, the COC would consider administering their DCF and HUD dollars through the CHSP process for the City of Tallahassee and Leon County. The way that would work, the way that we would get the most out of it, would be to dedicate a certain percentage of the COC funding to that coverage area and make awards for projects for all of the funding dedicated to homelessness through the CHSP process. For purposes of HUD, seeing that we're coordinating, it doesn't matter to them necessarily that the coordination happen under the COC exclusively or under another process. But the timing of it could be incredibly important.
And if I, may I?
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Okay, so I think you bring up a good point earlier about the spend rate of this amount of money. I mean, this is just a significant injection, and it's a good thing, but it is, we do have to be careful about the capacity of our existing agencies to spend through it. One thing that, you know, in coordination with all of our partners and talking closely about these various dollars is that ARP dollars in particular has been designed to be for strategic long-term initiatives and recovery, right? We went through the CARES Act funding where those were directly tied to recovery or response and mitigation. And so this was, let's get this money out the door as quickly as possible. And I think our respective commissions took leadership then. ARP, by just the sheer length of time that the federal administration has provided us, and with the guidance they provided so far, is do use this to address long-term systemic things. Take this as an opportunity to address things that take time. And so that's part of what our excitement is. We have the plan, we have the organizations, we have a structure, and now we can inject this funding in a thoughtful way rather than forcing through it. I'll make a note with just the cities, for example, our rapid rehousing and some of the CARES Act funding, we still have about $1.3 million of that to be spent. And so this is an opportunity for us to be thoughtful, to guide our spending with strategic objectives, and to give our system the capacity to grow to meet the demand that we know exists.
I think you bring up a very good point about the capacity of our agencies and drawing in new agencies. I think I heard you mention that about building up the capacity of agencies to put together programs or opportunities that would be a successful grant application. I will say that. It's my understanding that when the HUD or DCF NOFA comes out, agencies are pretty used to seeing the guidelines fresh in that NOFA and then putting together those programs during the RFP process. Is that correct? I mean, that could take a few months to respond to that RFP. Is that right? So our existing agencies are pretty used to that process. If there was funding that was not able to be pushed out in FY22, for example, it could be administered through a process the following year, the FY23. I mean, we don't have to allocate all the funding in the first year, to your point. I mean, that if there weren't the programs that qualified for it, and say there was a couple million left on the table, that funding availability would come up in the fall of 22, and kind of the same timeline as we would be releasing those contracts for CHSP. Is that?
If I understand your question correctly, I think CHSP works a little differently. So even though we are in a 2-year funding cycle, the agencies receive 2 years worth of funding.
Right.
And so their allocation is established for them, and they can make long-term planning. They wouldn't have to recompete for it. It's very rare that we have our citizen review teams leave money on the table. There's been a few times. And so I think their goal, like ours, is to get it out to them and allow the agencies the breathing room to implement it over 2 years.
Okay.
Commissioner Dozier, if we could wrap up, we have 6 colleagues in line and less than an hour left on the work.
I understand, sir. I'm coming in for landing right now. I wanted to unpack this point because, as we've heard from all 3 of our folks up here, we have an existing structure within Big Bend Continuum of Care that is trusted by federal and state and local to administer dollars. They're using our citizen review team members within their process already, and Amanda, if I heard you correctly, having some of the rescue plan dollars available when you get the HUD funding and doing a joint RFP this fall or, in the near future, could expedite some of those dollars getting out into the community, even if it takes a while, that 2 years you were talking about, to develop a permanent supportive housing program or something like that. We still get those dollars out into the community a year ahead of what is proposed through the CHSP process. So for my colleagues, what my question here is, given the need, given everything we're hearing from our community and the opportunities we have right now, why would we not use the existing process, get an MOU signed with Continuum of Care to administer under the same basic structure they have right now in coordination with CHSP and our city-county staff, to have this one process, reduce the burden on our agencies, increase the availability of coordination, other things, and the potential for other funding to come down sooner rather than later. I think we could do that through a relationship with COC beginning this fall versus waiting to sign those contracts in October, November of ¡22. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to hear from my colleagues, but since we don't have a motion on the table, I'll go ahead and do this.
We're going to entertain motions after
You're going to wait for a second?
everybody has a chance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will you put me in queue for that, sir?
Sure.
Thank you.
Commissioner Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And really, thank you to everyone who's here, who's had a part in this. And the presentation was really outstanding. I know that I learned a lot. And I think that overall, I'm grateful to see the progress that we've made. And I do think that we are well poised to make even more of an impact. And I think that the commitment is there to meet the goals that the BBCOC and that we have. I do have a few questions, and I hear what Commissioner Dozier is saying, and that was something that came up in some of my meetings about this. I do believe that we need to do whatever we can to get this money to the people who need it as soon as possible. I do totally support the establishment of a homeless services category. I think the coordination is essential to moving forward. But I would like to see if we can, when this came before us at our budget workshop, I was not expecting that what we voted on was to wait 15 months to get this money being spent. So that is a concern to me. A few other things that I wanted to raise, some things that I'm seeing as kind of themes that we haven't yet addressed yet that have been brought up by the public, and I know this is going to be a continuing conversation, but I want to make sure that we are thinking about this and planning for it, is the long-term recurring funding and more units. Because as we know, and it's going to be part of our presentation if we get to it after this, is we need those affordable units. We need the case management staff who can support that. Someone came up to me and was like, we just need one more case manager to reach the 100% capacity of meeting the need. And so that's something that I would like to see, I would have liked to see today, is how we are engaging directly and working directly with the Big Bend Continuum of Care on their strategic plan. They have, under objective for increase units of permanent housing by 300 units, by 2025. And some of these metrics that they have, I know that they cannot do on their own, and they need our support financially and otherwise to get there. And I hope that also moving forward, they have some service gaps that they identified that we haven't discussed. And some of the public speakers brought this up today, very limited resources for individuals experiencing homelessness with sexual offenses. Inadequate medium-term supportive housing and transitional housing for youth, families, and those with substance use disorders. These are the things that I think are going to get us to the decrease in duration of people experiencing homelessness and the decrease in the recidivism. So I really want to see us focus on that as well, because I think where we are with our recommendations today is good, but I don't think it's really going to get us to where we need to be or want to be. I mean, Amanda, right now, if we don't up our funding and our commitment, we are only meeting about 1/8 of the need, if I heard you correctly, of where we want to be to meet our goals or even have a shot at meeting our goals in the next 4 years. So those are just some concerns that I have. I know this isn't going to be our last workshop, but that I hope we are going to be moving forward to address. And then just a final point, I just want to express kind of where I'm coming from. We've got a lot to talk about when we're here, and 3 hours for 3 items, I just don't think is enough. If we're going to get like a real workshop where we're debating these issues and talking, I don't know who that needs to be directed to. I appreciate that we were able to have this workshop, but I really would like to see more time for us to dig into it, because we need the staff presentation. It was amazing. We need the public comment, but it really does not leave us much time, I think, to grapple with what we're going to do moving forward, especially since we're about to enter into a 6-week, break. So those are kind of my thoughts. And just to wrap it up, the main thing I wanted to walk away with today is just at least a commitment that we very soon talk about our long-term funding options and ideas, because that is a consistent theme that I hear from our providers, as well as more units and more direct engagement with how we're coordinating with the BBCOC strategic plan, because that needs to be there as well. And then finally, I do agree. I want to see, I support the options, but from what I've heard from the service providers, they need the money right away, and it doesn't make sense to me to wait for 15 months on this, especially with this unique kind of funding that are, non-recurring emergency funds. It doesn't make sense to me that we would allocate them in this way. Thank you.
Commissioner Cummings, followed by Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also express the sentiment of my colleagues. I would like to commend County Administrator, City Administrator, and Big Bend COC Representative Administrator for your great presentation, and even more for the printed material that we have. We've got some great information. I am certainly in support of coordinating services, in favor of a collaboration for services and resources as well. But I just have just a couple of questions related to your prioritization of your services. And I'll start with this. I have been at the corner of Macomb and Brevard Street for the last 30 years. That's where my office is. On any given night, you can pass by my office on the front. You can see some homeless people sleeping on the front porch. If you go up the driveway to park, you might find some homeless people sleeping under the canopy. And we don't have a problem with that as long as it's not loitering. But when I engage with these individuals, men and women of all racial Black backgrounds, they invariably appear to have mental problems, clearly some mental issues. About 50% of those have been veterans, homeless veterans. And it has been recurring for the last over 30 years that I have been at that location. Okay. And I recognize that in your summary, you all have indicated some prioritization for addressing the needs of homeless veterans specifically. But my question is, are we carving out any specific areas for direct services or to address the needs of those individuals that have mental issues? I know that there are boots on the ground that are out there working with our homeless population. I was talking to Mr. Delmas Barber, and we certainly appreciate him and all community services coordinators that are out there. But we know that the people are out there, and they're not just suffering from homelessness, but they have other issues that are related as well. And those issues contribute to the fact that they are homeless. So my question is, with this coordination, is there any specific emphasis to deal with individuals that are suffering from mental problems?
Amanda?
Yeah, so we do see this commonly, but you can't make somebody receive services for something. So, sorry, there we go, that's better. You can't force somebody to go into services. So a lot of times we see success when we have a permanent housing situation that we would have to offer that person and not make it the housing conditional upon services. Usually within the first 3 to 6 months, someone has a steady permanent place to live. They also want to embark on services that help them maintain their housing. Something becomes apparent when you get your own housing, and that is that sometimes your behavior and your challenges may impact your ability to keep that housing. And that makes it very real for people. So our staff with our providers work with clients once they're housed to say, okay, there's some other options out here that might help you with other things that have been a barrier to you keeping housing, like mental health treatment. So that's housing first, and it works really well. Typically, when we engage with people on the street who have a mental health illness or mental health issue that is untreated, if we meet them first and ask them to go through mental health treatment, they no longer want to talk to us. And so we have to make sure that we build rapport and trust, and our primary goal is housing. So that's kind of how our system approaches it. But I know that the city has recently put some other things in place to address the issues of the mentally ill. So,
Abena?
Mr. Mayor, may I have just one follow-up?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Commissioner.
Very briefly. I know that Sheriff McNeil and other entities in the city and the county have partnerships with mental health groups to refer individuals that they come in contact with that have some obvious mental concerns. Would it be out of the ordinary if we agree to this corroboration and coordination to carve out part of the program or incorporate some part of the program where there is some partnership with a local entity that could address some of those concerns, because I think that contributes to the revolving door of individuals, especially our veterans. And I just think we need to take an extra step to those individuals that risk their lives for our country, beyond saying, well, they've got mental problems and we can't force them to seek mental assistance, because there are individuals that are trained, and they can be engage those individuals to at some point seek assistance that's needed.
Yes, Commissioner, briefly on some of your questions, you asked about whether we are carving out special populations. So veterans are an important category that we recognize, and they do often show up in our chronically homeless population as well, and that is a target population. The recommendations and the discussions in the agenda item focuses on really moving the needle with that particular cohort, because as I mentioned, homelessness is so dynamic that we can't determine who will be homeless, but we do know the ones that have stayed homeless for a while. So these immediate recommendations will address that population first, we hope. But we also do have special funding for veteran homelessness services. It doesn't come through the city or the county. It often comes either directly to the COC or to some of these partner agencies. And the good news is, and I think Amanda will concur, that there is quite a bit of funding for addressing veteran homelessness. And so for the city and the county to be strategic, we can apply some of our funding elsewhere for those that are not necessarily qualifying for veteran homelessness services. That was part of the thinking as well with the recommendations that are provided. You mentioned the coordination with other services. The city has committed hundreds of thousands of dollars with mental health services newly this year. And while this discussion about homelessness inevitably touches on almost every kind of issue, what we want you to feel confident in is that there are a myriad of solutions that our existing partners are implementing. They're quite innovative. They're thinking about all the different options to serve clients. And while you might say we've dedicated X amount of dollars for homelessness, they're not restricted from providing the type of case management that is effective for a particular client, if that includes seeking additional mental health services for them. And that coordination is currently happening between the city, the county, 211 Big Bend for mental health coordination, our officers, and our launch of our crisis response unit has already happened, and we know and expect that the coordination will happen where if they encounter somebody who is homeless, we have a process in place to engage them to coordinate their entry and their exit out of homelessness. So that very much is our focus. That is happening. I don't know that you need to carve out a specific amount from today's allocation for that. It will happen by default by just the culture of collaboration that we are currently having in place.
Can I add?
Thank you. I'll move on.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Good. Shington?
Well, I just wanted to add, when you look at what is proposed and recommended, when you look at street outreach, going back to what you're saying, Commissioner Cummings, this is why the expansion is so critical and what we're talking about. When you talk about the people you say outside your office, there's, as Amanda was saying, there's a level of trust that has to be built with that population. And I just want to bring this to our attention. I think it's very, very important. Amanda, prior to last year, how many adult street outreach teams did we have in our community?
0,
Yes.
but we're not dedicated to veterans.
Right.
I mean, that's how far we've come as a community of the work that we've been doing together collaboratively and what we're trying to expand on. That's how we get there, and we've realized that that's an immediate need, and that's why the recommendations are set up the way that they are, because we know what those needs are. We've worked with the COC, we've worked with even the United States Veterans Administration Department, who administers like HUD VASH and things like that, to know what is our most critical needs and being able to do it quickly, immediately, but also taking the opportunity with these dollars to look at long term. So that's all I want to share.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I just want to thank Shington, Amanda, Abena, and my colleagues at the city and county. This is a bit historic, but all of us sitting at one table to discuss one of the more serious issues that has been facing our community for quite some time. So I'm glad we were able to take 3 hours to do so. To Commissioner Porter's point, I agree. It takes my family 3 hours to decide what to eat for dinner. So this conversation may require a little more time. I want to thank all the public speakers for coming out today. We've heard a wide range of ideas for solutions. Some of them I agree with, some of them I don't. But I think everybody who spoke all has the same goal, and that's to reduce the number of people experiencing homelessness in our community. And I think if we start there, we have a unified community that all wants to see the same thing, and I think that very rarely happens. The other thing I've heard from people with different ideas is unanimously they've agreed that we need to increase available funding for these services. We've heard from all of our service providers. We've heard from citizens in our community, and when we look at the numbers, one caseworker to 55 individuals, we heard 75 housing options when we need 300. There's a significant deficit there. So I mean, my first question will be, we also saw some very aggressive goals for 2025 from the Big Bend Continuum of Care. With what's proposed today, will we be able to meet those goals by 2025?
Amanda.
No,
We will
not alone. And keep in mind, these are goals of the COC and the 8-county area. So, keep in mind your funding should not support all 8 counties. but there does need to be more dedicated to this county specifically.
Based on what we're funding in the city of Tallahassee and Leon County, would you be able to project where we would be in 2025 as opposed to what the goal is?
I could work on that for you. There would definitely be some estimates, and there's some things that we can't predict, of course, which is some of the outfall related to the pandemic, but that is something that we could work on.
Okay. The next question, Mr. County Administrator, Mr. City Manager, can you walk us through the allocations that are presented today and what metrics those are based on, or what we're trying to accomplish, or how those dollar amounts were created?
Yeah, Commissioner, I would direct those questions to our experts. They have developed these in a thoughtful, collaborative manner. I think Abena from the city and Mr. Shinkton Lambie from the county can fully address those.
Ben?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, so I'll give a quick overview. One of the things that we considered first and foremost is a direction that was previously provided by the City and the County Commission. The funding allocation out of the original ARP that could be spent immediately, we want to get those out of the door. So those shelter operations, those contracts have already been under review by the respective service providers. Then we considered what the capacity is for those service providers that can expend it as quickly as possible. And as I mentioned earlier, there's still quite a bit of money from CARES Act funding that is to be spent. We also know that there are more partners that are eager to participate, but they do not meet the criteria that we're setting up in terms of performance metrics. They're not HUD aligned. They haven't gone through that process. And so even if we got the funding to them, they're not positioned to produce the performance metrics that we also want to implement. We considered the capacity of the COC. We asked them for a proposal. The request that was provided to the county commissioners for ARP was a proposal that was submitted by the COC, looking at what is possible, what is the spending capacity of the agencies right now, and we considered the alternative where they issue the RFP for the funds, and the timeline took us right back to what we would do with the CHSP platform. So we thought it was an opportunity for us to begin to create a ramp where we can do things immediately. We can focus on the things that is working. You heard Amanda give the staggering percentage of the street outreach effectiveness. That's working, and we want to continue that. We know it takes time to produce actual housing units. That's a more conversation that you'll have today, maybe, or in February. And so just thinking about, practically speaking, how we can expend those dollars, how we can achieve those strategic objectives, and give our community and our service providers a taste of what's possible when we coordinate. We thought that this was an amenable way to allocate the funding. The 793, I think, Shinkton, you memorized that number from the CHSP. That is literally just looking at which agencies receive CHSP funding for homelessness-specific services right now, and not wanting to, leave any of that money off the table. The assumption we made is that if we carry that amount forward and assume that it was going to also be for CHS, for homelessness services, we preserve that. Granted, the citizen review team makes the decision every year. Some years they give more, some years they give less. But we took what information we knew at the current spend rate for the general fund, and we applied it there. So that's part of the rationale. The categories of diversion and prevention and permanent supportive housing, those are categories that were proposed to the city and the county commission for ARP. So we want to preserve that and honor the decision that you made as well. But in the future, any of the applications for CHSP can apply for any of the HUD interventions that are possible. But those were the priorities that the COC identified as workable and something we can really move the needle on in the immediate future.
Thank you. And I think it also important to note, thank you to our friends in Washington who felt it not robbery to pass down some extra funding to our local governments and states as well. I believe when we look at the rescue plan, the city alone stands to collect nearly $40 million. And I really do appreciate the hard work, Abena and Shinkton, that you put into this. But I do recognize that the ultimate budgeting decisions will come from the city commission and the city administrator or the city manager and the county administrator working collaboratively to really address these issues head on. So I have lasting concerns that we're not allocating enough resources to hit the needs of the moment. I do wholeheartedly agree with your long-term vision, looking forward of how we build capacity within our agencies. But I think we need to push harder. I think we need to build capacity faster. We need to supply funding. If capacity means hiring more caseworkers, we need to provide the funding now to push that capacity forward as soon as possible. Because the urgency is very real. I hesitate to bring it up, but everybody knows we had a neighbor on Gain Street that died. He died living outside. He was not a neighbor, not just a neighbor, but he was a friend to us that have businesses there. Because like Ms. Cummings, we know the people who are sleeping outside in our area, and the living outside is dangerous, and we need to do everything we can immediately, because it could literally be life-saving if we take action right now. So I agree with the points of how can we expedite this and not wait 15 months to get money into hands, because the implication of that could be so serious for someone's life that I don't think we can just slow down. So I do think looking long-term at what we can do for 23 and 24 matter, but I think we need to be looking immediately. The federal government has blessed us with dollars that we can take immediate action. So I hope we'll continue that conversation today. I'm looking at my county colleagues as well to see how we can get money into hands of agencies right away, because when we hear from neighborhoods, when people are contacting our offices because they're having an issue in their neighborhood or somebody's sleeping on their property, and we tell them there just aren't enough resources. There's no capacity. We can't just put these people in jail. That's a problem, and it's a problem that we need to address immediately. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Maddox, any comment?
Yes, just a quick question. Shinkton.
Yes, sir.
Has everything that we've been talking about in terms of our actions towards homelessness, we've had this conversation at the commission level, right?
We've had a couple of different conversations regarding homeless shelter sightings and other items that we've presented to the board within the last few months, Commissioner.
What are the things that have been agreed upon with the board at the county level, or if any?
Well, the county commission agreed when we brought before them as part of the budget workshop, the ARPA funding that's being presented here, with the $6.2 million for homelessness was something that was approved by the board, and it was specifically for those specific areas that we talked about: street outreach, neighborhood-based agency capacity, permanent supportive housing.
So pretty much everything that we're talking about today has already been agreed upon by the county commission.
As far as where the fundings are allocated, that's correct. In those areas that we've talked about, yes. The establishment of this new category, of course, is something that is new that we're presenting. The board did also, on our side, did agree with contracting with Big Bend Continuum of Care for services with some of our ARPA fundings. What we've worked with here is the idea of looking at, with those allocations, a portion immediately being provided and contracting with the COC, so that way they can provide immediate support in the area of street outreach and some other things like that. And then also allocating some of those dollars while keeping them within the same area of permanent supportive housing and diversion diversion within the new homeless service category. So those fundings would go through there. So that way we can build capacity and get more agencies involved in providing the services in our community over the next few years.
So the funding, if I can rephrase what you're saying, the funding piece of this has been voted on and ratified by the county commission at our level.
Yes.
But what we're doing here is giving more detail to that funding as to how exactly it's going to be expended.
Yep.
Okay, just want to make that clarification. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Commissioner Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm going to be brief because I really want to hear from the Housing Authority and what their plans are. We're talking about housing, so we certainly want to hear what they have to present. But I just want to say a couple of things. One is this whole issue took on a greater sense of urgency for me and my neighborhood because over the past several months, we had a young man and his girlfriend to take up residence in a home that was left vacant in our neighborhood. It was his mother, who's elderly, and she went to live with a younger son in Atlanta. And so they took up residence on the porch of her house. And so we've been dealing with that issue, and it's been delicate because we knew that they needed some place to be, but we knew it didn't need to be on the porch of that house. And so, but that being said, we've come a long ways in this community. I know many of us may remember Mel Eby, who was one of the homeless champions in our community years ago, 10, 20, 25 years ago, maybe even, and started the old homeless shelter in the Frenchtown community. And so this has been a problem that I won't say a problem, this has been an issue that we've had to deal with in our community for a long time, and we've come a long ways. We're light years from where we were 25 years ago during the days of the shelter in the Frenchtown community. And we want to thank people like Rick Carney, who stepped up to help us in a big way address this issue with the relocation of the homeless shelter and the provisions that have been made for homeless in our community. But I think what we've heard here today is that this is an issue that we haven't even begun to get our hands around totally, because this goes from people living on the street to those who may be living, Abena, as you mentioned, from couch to couch. And there are lots of issues even within that spectrum. People with physical problems, mental health problems, lack of jobs or job training. And so, I am very pleased with what has been presented this morning and where we are and the direction that we've taken. Now, there will never be enough money to address this issue, but there are lots of issues in this city that have to be addressed. And so, for those who suggest we spend more money, make suggestions as to where that money is going to come from. Are any programs or services going to be cut or reduced? That's the issue that we're going to have to grapple with as a city, as a county, as a community. But I think we are at a launching point, especially with the coordination that we're talking about. We haven't had that in a long time. And so I'm encouraged about what I've heard and seen here this morning, and that we're off to a great start, and we'll continue to have these conversations. This is just a beginning. It's not going to be solved or resolved here this morning, but we've come a long ways, and we'll continue to have these conversations and look for programs and services and the funding that can be provided to help us continue to resolve this issue. And so, Mr. Mayor, those are just my brief comments on where we are, and I certainly would, again, look forward to hearing from the Housing Authority and what they're planning to do to provide the kind of housing that we're talking about for those who are homeless in our community.
Do want to bring this in for Landon so we can have the Orange Avenue presentation as well. Real quick, Commissioner Welch, you've been with us the entire time. Any quick comments by phone?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I want to, I'll be very brief. I know we want to hear about Orange Avenue. I want to thank staff and echo everybody's statements on all the work you're doing. I think this is a step in the right direction. I want to focus my comments real briefly on safety and security. I know everybody's kind of talked about what we're doing with our homeless population that's living in camps and things like that. I've flirted with this idea of creating a campground or an outdoor space that is dedicated to a population, who wants to live outside. I'm not talking about creating a Hooverville. I'm talking about creating a nice, clean, quality outdoor campsite, similar to what you would find in a state park, where we can provide services and security and safety. As we have seen in the past week, our homeless population is extremely vulnerable. We've had somebody pass away due to a violent crime on Gain Street. I think we've had perhaps maybe multiple incidents of that in the past couple of weeks. I think we've had issues with siting of homeless shelters in the past year, which creates a safety burden on neighborhoods that are adjacent to those shelters or those sites. I know the county has made efforts over the past couple of weeks or past couple of months to create policy changes that will raise the siting of homeless shelters to be the highest level of permitting and make sure that we engage with our neighborhoods. I just want to make safety the priority when we're talking about our homeless population. And I think that those two issues, where we site our homeless shelters, the processes that we go through, we have a model homeless shelter in this community that we should be using as a siting model for where we put our homeless shelters and how we treat our homeless population. And then I really do want to entertain an innovative and really forward-thinking approach to how we deal with our homeless population that insists on being outside. And I do think that there are progressive cities in our country, like Denver and other parts of the country, that have really been forward-thinking in how they deal with that. And I think Tallahassee has enough land and we have enough human capital that we could come up with a really model program to create a campground for our folks who are on street corners and in dangerous intersections. I know Commissioner Jackson has had problems with this in his district. It's just plainly unsafe for our unhoused population, and I think we can do better, and I look forward to having those conversations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate it. Commissioner Jackson, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Any comments? You want us to keep moving on?
Go ahead, but thank you for recognizing me. I appreciate it. And yes, this has been brought up at numerous commission meetings by myself, so although I'm late to the party, I appreciate everyone taking the time out to be here to discuss something that...
Excellent. All right, we're going to have two different motions, one from the city, then I'll turn it over to the county as well. Commissioner Williams-Cox, I'm going to come to you in 2 seconds as our representative on the BBOC to make the motion for staff recommendation 1, 2, 3, if that's the direction that you want to go in. I want to thank you and Commissioner Minor representing our bodies on the Big Bend Continuum of Care and the hard work getting us to these recommendations. We certainly appreciate it. Amanda, Abena, Shinkton, thank you for your hard work and dedication. I do believe this is a game changer. I do think our goals are ambitious, but keeping in mind that that is an 8-county area goal, I am very comfortable with the first step being the recommended options on the table for our community. Commissioner Cummins, we are making some great strides in the mental health arena with some of the new partnerships. I know that you'd be pleased with the new mobile response team that we put together at the city, consisting of a trained mental health professional, law enforcement, and paramedic, so that we're not just sending a uniformed law enforcement agent to every single call. And we would love to have the sheriff's office join in the unincorporated areas, and I believe that those conversations are going. I do agree that the street outreach is a great first step. We need to build these relationships, whether it's through the veterans, whether it's through our children and street outreach for youth and teens, whether it's for the LGBTQ plus community. We have many different communities that we've got great strategies in place. Please keep up the great work. And I also agree, Mr. Chairman, on the position, and I'm so thankful that the county is going to be discussing the item in regards to human trafficking this evening. Yes, I cannot speak on behalf of all my colleagues, but as the mayor, I am extremely interested in seeing the direction and the conversation that y'all have tonight, and seeing if there are ways that the city can, in fact, partner up with the county on that great program. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
With that, Commissioner Williams-Cox, you're recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mayor. I offer that we accept staff recommended actions, option 1, 2, and 3.
Second.
It's been properly moved by Commissioner Williams-Cox and seconded by Commissioner Richardson. Seeing no further comment, Commissioner Porter.
I just want to reiterate, I mean, do we not, I would really like to see this money go straight into the BBCOC, which is what I've heard is their desire as well as the desire of the other service providers. So I just feel like I can't in good conscience vote to delay for 15 months getting this money, you know, in the community. Is there any appetite for for that?
Commissioner Porter, I would simply say, and then of course I'll come back to the maker of the motion, that I understand your concerns, and I do think that we should always and continuously look creative. But when I have the executive director of the Big Bend Continuum of Care sitting here at the table, having worked with both the city and the county, and this is her recommendation.
It's not her, go ahead, excuse
Commissioner
me.
Porter, I have the floor.
I know, excuse
The
me.
recommendation for option 1, 2, and 3 that's before us, this is what I'm feeling comfortable with. Now, what I would suggest, Commissioner Porter, is that if you want to continue this conversation, we can do it when we get back from recess during our City of Tallahassee budget meetings, because that's the implication if we're using general revenue funds to fill the gap. And that would be the appropriate venue to have those conversations. You have the floor.
Thank you. Amanda, I hate to put you on the spot. My understanding from our conversation was that your recommendation, your preference, was that this money go to the Big Bend Continuum of Care and not to, through the CHSP process, not because you don't support the CHSP process, but because of the urgent need that these monies not wait 15 months before they're spent. Can you clarify your position?
Sure. I think that, there's compromise in any sort of workings. As Shington likes to say, it's sausage making. And so we have come up with many different things. Things we talked about initially were CHSP recurring funds of the $700,000 or so coordinating. We did not recommend that the ARPA funding go through the CHSP process, but after talking with Shington and Abena, there is a ramping up in capacity issue. So with us being contracted with for the 1.4 million, we can start to make things move. We are open to the idea of having all of the funding go directly through us, but I need to, set the expectation that if all of the money is contracted with us, that does not mean the day after we have the contract, everyone will be housed. It's still going to be a staged approach. So yes, we're open to it. We'd be happy to do it that way, but we also see the value in the CHSP process to some extent. It does mean that prevention and diversion funds would not make it out until the CHSP process, and we haven't yet really seen how the eviction moratorium being lifted is going to impact us. So it might be better to include some of that in that 1.4 so we have a little flexibility.
We do. We have that. So we have funding that is going to the COC to the tune of $375,000. Commissioner, for street outreach, we have $675,000 recommended for permanent supportive housing that goes right away to the COC. And we have $360,000 recommended that would go to neighborhood-based capacity building. So those contracts are being negotiated right now. That's the 1.4. The remaining amount of it will give us the time to implement the kind of platform that would allow this funding to be effective.
And I'll add, these, our dollars are not the only dollars right now in the community. One of the things that is mentioned in the workshop item, I want to make it clear, and I want to give a shout out to, because I know they're up next, the Tallahassee Housing Authority that is providing 66 emergency vouchers for those who will be exiting out of homeless in our community, working with the COC. I mean, there's a lot of dollars that we're utilizing within the next couple of months that we're going to be trying to get out. So the work does not end, it continues, but we've identified what we believe are in the short term immediate things that can get done, and then what we were going to do is long-term utilize those dollars. It's being strategic. I think we're being very strategic in the way that we're working, and as Amanda said, this was a lot of work between the three of us in coming with these recommendations, and they are being presented to you by the county, the city, and the COC.
I'm going to go ahead and bring this in for a Landon and call for the vote so that the county has time as well.
Just one final comment, Mr.
One final comment. Yes, sir.
I've been listening to everybody at the table, and I recognize that there's not an appetite to expand funding today, but I've heard from multiple on the city and the county side that there is a desire to expedite getting these funds into hands of people who can help. So I think what we could do that maybe a compromise would be to allocate some funds immediately that the Big Bend Continuum of Care can use in 2022. And what I would recommend is that we just split the $3 million into thirds, allocate $1,025,000 to be put into our community immediately through the Big Bend Continuum of Care, and then the remainder in the CHSP process as we develop it. So that way, it's the same amount of money that can start helping people and start helping people sooner. It can give people the opportunity for capacity building over the next 2 years and can really address the immediate needs we're experiencing. So I'll make a substitute motion that we adopt 1, 2, and 3, but take $1 million of the $3,075,000 and allocate it to fiscal year 2022 to be distributed through the Big Bend Continuum of Care process.
Second that.
The substitute motion on the table, seconded by Commissioner Porter. Open it up for comment. Commissioner?
Listen, I'm going to say this. We sat here for the past 3 hours, shortchanging Orange Avenue, to go through this process, to look at the recommended actions by these 3 individuals representing the different entities. I am very comfortable with the work that they have put in. I'm very comfortable with the recommendations that they have made. I'm very comfortable that they have looked down the road and understand what all of this could mean. I don't want to sit here as a commissioner, having not been in the ditch with you guys, to come now and change your recommendations. Now, I too want to get it where it needs to go, but you just gave us the reasons why it's happening already. We didn't just start this today. This has been ongoing, and this is an organized ramp up, and it doesn't blow up a process that we have in place, the CHSP process, which is a very complicated process, as some will say. So I'm comfortable with the recommendations from the county, the COC, and the city, that these recommendations listed here are what you came to the table with today, and I will not insult you by going against your recommendation. So that's where I am.
Substitute motion on the table made by Commissioner Matlow, seconded by Commissioner Porter. All those in favor of the substitute motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
And it fails.
No.
It fails 3-2 with the mayor, Commissioner Richardson, Commissioner Williams-Cox in dissent. We are back on the original motion for staff recommendation, options 1, 2, and 3. All those in favor of the motion on the table, made by Commissioner Williams-Cox, seconded by Commissioner Richardson, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Aye.
Passes 4-1 with Commissioner Porter in dissent. I'm going to now hand it over to the county. Before we do so, colleagues, I'm willing, if y'all are up for it as well, to extend the meeting till 12:30 to give Orange Avenue proper opportunity, at least 30 minutes to be able to do a brief
moved.
presentation and have some public comment. I'm just looking informally, if that's okay. Great.
So
Mr.
moved.
Chairman, I know that Commissioner Dozier wanted to go first on the county side. Let me turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We need consistency between city and county, and I've heard the city's motion here in unanimous support. I will just say this, that we do have a strong unified recommendation in this agenda item. I appreciate the work. Compromise is part of the process that we don't see before the agenda item is produced. And it is my feeling that it is no insult to any esteemed staff or experts to raise questions and to ask about alternatives. And the alternative that some of us have asked about is something that you all did discuss. And I believe strongly that some of our staff, and particularly Big Bend Continuum of Care, believes that the alternative of working directly through COC can and would work for our community. To your point earlier, Abena, it might time out in the same way. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. We've got a process within COC that could work incredibly well, and if it benefited us just a little bit to expedite the funding and get it into that process with the HUD NOFA, as Amanda described earlier, it just might meet the urgency that our community is demanding, that we all feel. Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion for option 1, 2, and to adjust option 3 to administer all funding, CHSP and American Rescue Plan through Big Bend Continuum of Care. I have not heard any of my colleagues speak to that. So I think we need marching orders coming out of this meeting. So I will go ahead and make that motion to see if there's a second. If there isn't, I will support what I assume will be staff recommendations. So that is my motion. Looking for a second.
Commissioners, is there a second on Commissioner Dozier's motion?
Okay. Well, then I will retract that and make a motion for staff recommendation.
All right. Thank you very much, Commissioner
Mr.
Dozier.
Chair, second.
Motion's been made by Commissioner Dozier for options 1, 2, and 3, seconded by Commissioner Cummings. Thank you very much. Speakers?
Call the question.
All right. Yeah. Commissioner Welch, are you able to hear us? Do you have any comments?
No, sir.
What's that, sir?
I have no comment.
Okay. Seeing no other discussion, we'll move on to the vote. Thank you very much, Commissioner Maddox. All those in favor of the motion for options 1, 2, and 3, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Okay, Commissioner Welch, just to clarify, Commissioner Welch, you are voting in the affirmative, correct?
That is correct. Okay. I apologize. The timing on this
No worries.
technology is not ideal.
Glad to have you with us. So the motion passes unanimously, 6-0 with Vice Chair Proctor out of chambers. Mr. Mayor, before I hand it to you, I just want to thank again Abena, Shinkton, and Amanda. Just terrific work. I have the pleasure of working with you as well as the agencies within the Big Bend Continuum of Care. We've got a really good, talented team here that work very hard every single day to help people that are struggling with homelessness. And so just want to thank you all very much for everything you're doing. This is quality work. Thank you very much. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We are back on to 2.02, the Tallahassee Housing Authority and the Orange Avenue Apartments Redevelopment Project. Just to make an announcement, we were to adjourn in 4 minutes. We have extended the meeting until 12:30. This item is an information-only item. I guess we can ceremonially take a vote to accept the report, but there is no action to be taken today. We are looking forward to the presentation. Brenda, I hate to do this to you. Let's keep it to 15 minutes if you can. You have 4 public speakers, so just thinking time-wise, that's, a solid 12 to 15 minutes in itself. So, Abena, will you be kicking off this agenda item for us?
Actually, I will.
Shinkton has the pleasure.
Shinkton, thank you very much.
I will wrap it up at the end.
Sorry. All right, Commissioners, I'll just get started with the next item, which is presentation on the redevelopment of Orange Avenue project by Tallahassee Housing Authority. As you know, this project has been a top priority of the county and city, as demonstrated by the actions that have been taken over the past few years, which Abena will touch on a little later. We have, of course, Brenda, Executive Director of the Housing Authority, as well as Ray Kuniaski with Columbia Residential to provide you updates on the redevelopment of the project, including a timeline on demolition and relocation efforts. But before I do that, I want to frame how this project fits our mutual goal of increasing the stock of affordable housing in our community. As highlighted in the workshop packet in 2020, the Florida Housing Coalition, which serves as the technical arm for affordable housing programs for the state, completed a market analysis for Tallahassee that found that our community has an aging stock of housing, a limited amount of 1 to 2 bedroom affordable units, and a lack of affordable rental units for extremely low and low income households. That's households earning 50% or less of our area median income. And so, for example, for a family of 4, that would be a family making $38,000 or less. Based on this information and the data from the Schimberg Center for Housing Studies at the University of Florida, the highest affordable housing need in our community is rental units for households earning 50% or less of our area median income. They actually make up the largest population that spend more than 50% of their housing costs. 50% of their income on housing costs, like rent and utilities. So that brings me to the redevelopment of Orange Avenue. ARPA Apartments, which seeks to fulfill our highest needs by significantly increasing the number of new high-quality, affordable rental units for low-income households. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Brenda on how that will happen over the next few months and what it means for the current tenants at Orange Avenue.
First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation or provide you with an update regarding the redevelopment of the Orange Avenue site. With me today is Ray Kuniansky, who is the Chief Development Officer for Columbia Residential, the Housing Authority's developer partner. Also with me is Tawana Thompson. She's the Director of Development for the Tallahassee Housing Authority. She was very instrumental in coordinating all of the effort around the demolition application. Also with me is our Director of Housing Choice Voucher Programs, Marco Young, who has been with us for a short while and has made a major contribution and will be making a major contribution as we move forward with issuing vouchers. Our presentation today is in two parts. I will make an update regarding relocation, and Mr. Kuniansky will provide you with an update regarding the development. To begin with, I'd like to give just a brief overview of the Tallahassee Housing Authority. The Housing Authority owns and manages 544 apartments and single-family homes. The single-family homes are scattered throughout the city of Tallahassee and Leon County, and the apartments are located at Orange Avenue, 2710 Country Club Drive, Springfield Apartments at 1700 Joe Louis Street, and Pinewood Place Apartments, which are located at 2940 Grady Road. The Housing Authority also provides rental assistance on behalf of 2,300 families throughout the metropolitan area and nationwide. We have approximately 50 employees and an annual budget of $27 million. The Housing Authority recently received approval from HUD to demolish the Orange Avenue property on June the 29th. Prior to receiving approval to demolish the property, the Housing Authority hired a team of relocation specialists to provide relocation advisory services. We hired a relocation coordinator. Most of you know her. Ms. Dorothy Edmond Johnson is the coordinator, and she is doing an excellent job. We also hired 3 relocation outreach workers, and we intend to hire a couple more employees to provide transportation services. On Friday, the 90-day notice to relocate was issued to all of the residents at Orange Avenue. The notice was hand-delivered to all of the residents. Those who were home were able to sign for the notice. We also issued the notice certified mail return receipt. We will begin by relocating residents in Phase 1. Also, any resident who has already found a unit will also be issued a voucher immediately, along with those residents in Phase 1. I've received many calls from residents who have been looking for housing and have located and found housing, and we want to make sure we get them a voucher as quickly as possible, along with the residents in Phase 1. We will begin with Phase 1, and we will follow Phase 1 with Phase 2, 3, and 4. Just to give you a description, Phase 1 consists of Canton Circle, and then Phase 2 will consist of Priscilla Lane. Phase 3 will consist of Phase 3.
No, Phase 3 is the
top of the hill
Yeah,
on the
but
east side
I'm
of
trying to think of the street name.
I can't think.
I can't think of the street name right off the bat, but Phase 4 is Bates Street. The relocation briefing sessions began yesterday with Phase 1. We had 2 sessions. Both sessions, I'm happy to announce, were attended, very well attended. We were surprised at how we had a nearly perfect attendance for both sessions. The residents showed up. None of the residents want to move into public housing. All of the residents that were briefed yesterday asked for a voucher to move to the neighborhood of their choice. Sessions will also occur today for the residents in Phase 1, and we will have a makeup session tomorrow for anybody that couldn't make it. But we've had really, really good attendance, and if you know anything about tenant meetings, to get a nearly perfect attendance is not something that happens every day. But they showed up and they were ready to relocate. Also, on Thursday and Friday of this week, we will issue vouchers to all of the residents in Phase 1 and those residents who have already found a unit. So we're looking at completing the briefing sessions and issuance of vouchers for everyone in Phase 1, which consists of 55 families out of the 200. All residents in Phase 1 will be issued, again, they will be issued vouchers by the end of the week. And we are also planning a meet and greet for July 30th. And we're inviting all of the landlords and management companies to participate in the meet and greet so that we can match them up with residents who are looking for a place to stay. And we've gotten really good responses back, lots of good interest in attending that meeting, so we're looking forward to the meeting on the 30th. And we will also have provide subsequent meet and greets as we move through the relocation process. It is our intent to move as quickly as possible to get all of the vouchers issued. However, we're going to, slow it down just a little bit in the beginning to make sure that we move through the process in an efficient manner. We don't want to, try to issue all the vouchers at one time, but we want to make sure that we are efficient and provide the vouchers as in a smooth process. So with respect to relocation, the process is off to a good start, and we're looking forward to everything moving along in a nice manner.
Excellent. Before we get into any questions, and again, this is an information item only, let's go ahead and take public comment. Mr. Clark, if you'll walk us through. We have 3 people, I believe, in-house and 1 person virtually.
That's correct, Mayor. The first speaker we have is Jeremy.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Was that, I thought. There was a little bit more, I think.
Yes, we have a presentation.
Ray, did I cut you off? Am I going too fast?
I didn't
Sorry
even get
about that.
started. No problem.
My sincere
Hey,
apologies.
after our last meeting when we blew your mind, it's only fair.
You brought it up, not me.
Hey,
Ray, go ahead.
reality
I
is
am
what
very
it is.
sorry about
No
that.
worries.
Please,
No worries at all.
Please proceed.
I understand the time constraints, and I guess I get to be the first one to say good afternoon because it is after 12. So what I will do is quickly run through kind of where we are. We have been meeting with each and every one of you now for years, most recently in May, to discuss this project and to keep it moving forward. We are thrilled to know that we do have funding for the first 2 phases, which is what is currently pictured up here on the screen. Well, this isn't working that well. The first two phases are the primary block of the entire site. It's a 29-acre site. More than half of that land is concentrated in this piece of property that is bounded by Orange Avenue, which is on the right side of the screen, Country Club, Putnam, and Brighton. Combined, we will be building 290 new units on that site. We have a 4% bond sale commitment from the Florida Housing Finance Corporation, which we are in underwriting with now, which is where we have experienced a significant gap due to construction prices. And we have a 9% commitment that we just received from Florida Housing Finance Corp. And are just beginning the underwriting process with them on that. We expect to close the bond sale transaction by the end of this year, at the absolute latest by January 15th, as our bond reservation expires on January 22nd. Those are critical deadlines. Phase 2, we would close most likely in May of 2022. We have a third phase for senior, which would go on the block that faces Orange Avenue on the east side of Country Club, where we have acquired an additional 4 acres of land that was adjacent to it that was vacant property, so that we'll be addressing that entire site with looks like 110-unit senior-only facility. That application is due to Florida Housing Finance Corp. On August the 26th, and we are working with the city on getting the commitments in order to qualify for the local government area of opportunity funding. And so that is well underway. Just so you understand that particular piece of the puzzle, under the Florida Housing Finance rules, they have goals. One of the goals is the local area of opportunity, which means one project that is supported by both the city and the county, and that there's a financial commitment that the city has already made. By doing that, and the fact that we have applied under that goal for 3 years in a row unsuccessfully due to the lottery process, we now have a 40% chance of getting funding for that transaction, as opposed to effectively zero based on a lottery structure. So we feel like that one has a good opportunity, that we won't know the answer to that until the end of this year, and then we would not be invited to underwriting until middle of next year for that phase. So in May, we were here. We had just received the bids, 3 bids for the construction of Phase 1, which is 130 units, shown as Phase 1 up on the screen. Family, it's a mixture of units at 30% of AMI, 50% of AMI, and 60% of AMI. So all affordable based on the Florida Housing Finance rules and the structure of the financing. We got in our numbers that were based on April bids from 3 contractors, and kind of had our minds blown because they were so far out. We were $6 million roughly off where we had expected to be based on contracts we had been executing with contractors to build products 6 months earlier. That was largely due to the situation with lumber. All of these issues are a result of a delay in the supply chain, which we are now experiencing as a result of all of the COVID activities, and the fact that the lumber mills were basically shut down approximately a year earlier, and as they ramp up, the cost, frankly, that they're taking advantage of, is my view, it has risen. And in fact, in the marketplace, lumber rose 420% in cost in 6.5 months. It's the largest increase in any commodity that I personally have ever experienced. So our pricing, although not at the peak of that market, was pretty close to the peak, and the numbers came back in $5.8 million above our budget, which we did discuss with many of you individually in May. We have been working since then to figure out how do we address that issue. I am very pleased to say that we have taken a $5.8 million deficit and have now commitments that take us down to a $3.8 million deficit, and we are working on an additional $1.5 million to bring us down to a $2.3 million deficit. So we have, in 6 weeks, I think we've made a major major progress in addressing the financial issues of the project. The other issue that we have is a timing structure. We're not set to close on phase 1 until December, which means we won't lock our contract price in until late October, which means we have time for commodities to continue to come down. The price of lumber has come down by about 20%. The expectation is it will continue to drop as the mills get up to 100% capacity, but the feeling in the marketplace is it will not drop back. You know, they're going to continue to keep prices up at some level. What we are working to do is fill the balance of a gap that we believe is roughly $2.3 million, and we also believe will come down between now and the time we have to actually execute the construction contract. We did, after getting 3 bids, the low bid by $1 million difference was Mad Dog Construction, so we are working directly with Mad Dog. We have a meeting set up for later this week to work through value engineering and other things, so that process is underway. We will need hard commitments in order to meet the Florida Housing Finance guidelines by early October. And so I think that's sort of the time schedule that we're working on right now, which gives us a little more time to watch the marketplace, more time to work on value engineering, and hopefully bring this $2.3 million number down even further. But we will need hard commitments in early October in order to meet the underwriting criteria and get final approvals from Florida Housing Finance Corporation. Our goal will be to have the numbers where they are at that point in time, to have hard commitments that would get us through the underwriting process and really not lock in what the actual final number would be until we lock in price with our contractor and have confirmed items. And that may last a little bit longer because depending upon the market, the choice might be to not lock in the lumber price at the point of closing. And the reason I'm saying all of this is that we recognize, and listening for the last 3 hours, the critical nature of the issues that you're grappling with. We recognize that your dollars are limited, and we're not blind to the fact that these are all significant issues and significant investments that you have to make choices on. We are basically $29.5 million in our pockets on a $33 million transaction and shovel ready to go with all other approvals. So we hope that that brings some weight to the conversation and helps you in your decision-making process. We will commit to you that once all prices are locked in, if it turns out that we don't have to exercise the commitment that you give us in October, hopefully we will be able to say, no, we don't need all of those dollars, this is what we need, and return some of it to you. Let's see, so last but not least, the other items that we're working on, which come to about $1.5 million, is our value engineering process with Mad Dog. So we're going through a process with them, the civil engineer and the architects, to figure out how to take costs out of the project without sacrificing quality. There are a number of things that our company is well aware we can do that do not sacrifice quality but do reduce costs based on our standard versus what sometimes the market dictates and dollars dictate. The other thing that we're working on, and I've had 2 meetings thus far with Florida Housing Finance Corp over this, they have a fund source from the National Housing Trust Fund that they are looking to work together with their LINK program. As part of our application, we are required to accept units under the LINK program, which relates to the conversation that you all just had, as it's disadvantaged and homeless individuals that come through service providers to permanent housing. We already committed to that program in our application. It's part of the Florida Housing Finance Corporation process, but they now have a funding source through the National Housing Trust Fund that they can monetize that And in our case, they're looking at possibly up to 5 units that they would put $185,000 per unit or $925,000 total dollars into the transaction. So we believe from the 3 conversations that we have had with their team, with Marissa Button and her team, that these are compatible and that we can meet the requirements of the National Housing Trust Fund, which are a little bit different than our current requirements through HUD, through the city, through the county, et cetera. So we're working through that, and it looks really good that we will be able to secure those resources, and that's how we get down yet another $1.5 million. So with that, I'm going to stop because obviously time is
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate it. Mr. Clerk, let's walk us through public comment.
Just making sure for a second there wasn't somebody else needed to speak.
No, you're good. I think
We're going to do public comment now.
All right, we'll go Jeremy Block, followed by Tiffany Hill.
Mr. Block, thanks for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, Jeremy Block, 1109 East 6th Avenue in Tallahassee. Thank you for extending the festivities. I changed my format a little bit based on the presentation that Ms. Williams just gave. I was going to hit on the point that there were 5 or 6 very positive things that are being done for residents of Orange County. And among them was the institution of the, and I don't know the proper terminology, but the 3 or 4 clerk positions that are meeting with the families, and they're currently doing that. I wasn't aware that the letters went out on Friday. I thought they were still forthcoming. So that's terrific. The other thing is the meeting with the landlords for the 30th of the month is one more tool that they've used to try to make this come together smoothly. As things were coming together in terms of information I was receiving, I didn't have a very warm, comfortable feeling that this was going to step off on an even keel. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to be here, because I'm hitting on a couple of the negative things. Imagine that. The other thing is that the Tallahassee Housing Authority has always inferred that at any given month in Tallahassee, there are approximately 50 available units for rental. I think that might be a bit exaggerated. I'm not sure how that really gets implemented. I think it's going to be unfortunate to discover that they're not really available except maybe on paper. There are going to be 55 families that need housing. And interestingly enough, the current Phase 1 area has some 4 and 5 bedroom apartments in it. That's a lot of people to house in a 3-bedroom apartment that they might be moving into. I think it's unlikely that the voucher situation will cover that amount of square footage that 6 or 7 people need to live in. I think we're going to discover that's a tripping point. If they do Section 8, it could work. If they do the vouchers, they're really on their own to find a place. I think it's going to be awkward. And the biggest thing I took away from all the information I've been able to glean from recently is that there's an interesting phrase that reoccurs in almost every paragraph of what's been put out. And that phrase is, for those who remain eligible.
You're at about 20 seconds.
To me, that infers that there are people that aren't going to be eligible for any of this program because they're delinquent in their rent, they've had a felony conviction, they've had a drug arrest. There are any number of things that can knock people out of the running for a place to live. And those people are at risk along with seniors and along with those that are disabled. And I look forward to any of this group contacting me formally. I'd love to work with them in solving those problems that I have identified this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please, Mr. Clerk.
Tiffany Hill, and then Stanley Sims.
Hey, Ms. Hill. Great to
Hi.
see you. Your name and address for the record.
Tiffany Hill. I reside at 504 Putnam Drive, Tallahassee, Florida, 32301. And I am here. I'm not about to beat up the Tallahassee Housing Authority. I applaud you all for what you have done, the steps that you have taken. Not that I agree with everything, but it's a move. It's a movement. And from what I've heard, it seems like numbers are increasingly going up on the cost of doing the project. So the whole thing about is costing more to to rebuild and to renovate is kind of going out of the window in a sense. But I'm not really here to speak about that. What I'm here to speak about is historical stuff with the Orange Avenue apartments. We don't know what the historical designation is there, and it was given a historical designation. But what was it? Was it the culture of the community? Because if it was, my father, Oliver Hill Sr., was the lead in that, in creating that culture. He has been with the Orange Avenue United Tenant Association since 1971. I was 1 year old. I am 50 years old. Yes, a lot of berries and juices on my face, right? So it really bothers me to hear that his name was put on a building to honor him and everything that he has done, all the sacrifices that he had made. My father has cerebral palsy. He is disabled. My sister takes care of him. I have to push him around now in a wheelchair. He has worked hard. No one has seen him come home at night when he's hurting. So to tear down a building and not even consider to build something in that place to represent a man who is a model for the community, a model for someone who has disability, to let them know that you can do it too. He started a business, a corporation, a 501c3, back in the 70s, a black man. And you mean to tell me you can't put back a smaller building that will serve as a museum with our South City, which is Orange Avenue Apartments, is what we called it. You can't put back pictures in a museum and put computers in there and create an entrepreneurship hub or something.
You're at about 15 seconds.
Back there. It can be done. It doesn't take that much money. You're throwing out all these numbers. Throw out a number for it to represent and recognize a man who has stood in the trenches for years and is still standing today. He supported me as a veteran in the United States Army, a combat veteran. I crossed the burn in Iraq. I know how it feels to live in barrack-style housing. It doesn't feel good. But let me tell you this, and I'm gonna leave you with this. Please remember historical stuff and those who have been in the trenches regardless of their disabilities and are a great example for those who follow behind him. I am a success story. My father is disabled, so is my mother. But I survived. I am here. And I work for an organization that is bigger than anything. But I am here because I have love for my father. And I have that respect. And I'm hoping that you all will respect my dad and put his name back on the building.
I'm sorry, your time's expired.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill, and thank you for your service to the country. Our next speaker, please.
Stanley Sims.
Mr. Sims, your name and address for the record, please. You have 3 minutes.
I'm not gonna weigh y'all out today. Miss Brenda do a darn good job. I've lived over there on Texas Street. The conditions. You can't put a full-size bed in some of them rooms. You can only plug and plop so much. That's why we have to preserve our history. But to preserve history, we don't have to live in that kind of calamity. Thank you. Miss Brenda, I pray for you, because it ain't easy helping us.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Mr. Clerk.
Our last speaker, Mayor, is Sarah Teresa Haskell, who is connected via WebEx.
Ms. Haskell, are you with us?
I am, but I pass.
Thank you. Do we have any other public speakers today?
No, sir.
Well, Brenda, Ray, thank you very much for the update. We certainly do appreciate it. This was an informational.
Mr. Mayor, I
Commissioner
know.
Williams Cox.
Thank you. I know that is informational, and I want to thank everybody who's been involved. And I want to appreciate Ms. Williams and her staff for coming to sit through these numbers of hours to make your brief presentation. But we look forward to keeping up with what you're doing and where it's going, because I live on the south side, and so does Commissioner Richardson. So Orange Avenue Apartments, those are my neighbors. And I value that. And so I am very interested. I'm driving by there, telling somebody last night, that's where it's gonna happen, right there. I'm paying attention to what's happening there. And to Ms. Tiffany Hill, I don't know where she went. Okay, Ms. Tiffany Hill, I'm sure that we will figure out a way to remember your daddy.
Yeah.
Because we all know what your daddy has done in our community. And I know that Ms. Williams and the crew will do the honorable thing and honor your dad for his service and his work. And thank you for your service. But I would like to, I know we don't have to do this, but I would like to move that we accept the update that was provided by the Tallahassee Housing Authority.
Sounds good, and I'll pass it to the county in just a second. Ceremonial motion to accept the report made by Commissioner Williams Cox, seconded by Commissioner
Mr. Mayor.
Richardson.
Can I
Comments?
have just a really quick, I just wanted to say how proud I am of Ms. Williams and the work that she has done over the years. I remember when I first came to the commission and the CRA board in particular, we talked about this project. But at that time, South City was not in the Frenchtown Southside CRA district. And we worked for 4 years to make that happen so that we could provide the seed money that the Housing Authority could get to eventually get the funding for this redevelopment project. And here we are, these years later, and it is about to happen. I'm excited about it. As I've said before, this is going to be transformational for the south side of Tallahassee, not just South City, but the south side of Tallahassee. And I'm looking forward to it. And Brenda, I appreciate the leadership and perseverance that you have shown on this project, and we're looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Motion's been made by Commissioner Williams Cox to accept the status update, seconded by Commissioner Richardson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, passes unanimously 5-0. Before I pass it over to my colleague at the county, let me just apologize to Mr. T.J. Lewis of OEV, and we have Joy Blomley from Tallahassee Board of Realtors and Bill Kimball from Tallahassee Builders Association. We were unable to get to the next item. We're going to have to reschedule. But thank you so much for coming out and being prepared, TJ. We really appreciate it. Okay?
But we know you've enjoyed yourself, right?
Yeah. and rest assured, we have the written documents. We've read the written documents. I encourage anybody with questions to reach out to you. But we'll do a more formal presentation later. Thank you, sir. Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the County Commission side, Commissioner Dozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll pick up where the mayor left off there for a second. We could talk about homelessness for another couple of hours. We could talk about this incredible project and other affordable housing, the lessons learned that may help us in the future, right? For another 3 hours. They are important, as you said, Ray. They overlap. And to your comments about the third agenda item, this was my concern at the beginning of the meeting, and I hope we can fold that information into our housing workshop, as well as an update on South City as we go forward. So I really appreciate spending time right on the funding question, because I think county, city, we've all heard a little bit about the benchmarks you've met in recent months, that you've actually achieved a lot of funding, and that is phenomenal and speaks to how much you all have worked on this over the years. But also, we all are aware of the increase in material costs and other things. So I'm glad to see that gap shrinking. And just one clarification, I think I noted this in the item, when you said the October funding, was that the increased bond from the HFA that was referenced in the item? I just wanted to make sure, or is it additional funding?
No, the gap that we estimate right now is $2.3 million, and that's in excess of the increased bond capacity. The circumstance with the bond capacity has more to do with the IRS requirements over how much of your total hard costs have to be covered by bonds. And those dollars actually get paid down to permanent financing levels. So what we're looking at is total project costs and total committed dollars to cover those project costs on a permanent basis. And we have a $2.3 million gap.
And so there would be a request for additional funding to help fill
That
some or
gap.
all that gap?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And we will have to have firm commitments on that once we have a defined gap in September. We would have to have those commitments in October in order to meet all the requirements of Florida Housing Finance Corp. For their underwriting and final approvals in November to close in December. And the conundrum is we won't execute and finalize a construction contract for a month and a half after we have to have those firm commitments. And with what's happening in the commodities market, it's highly likely that that gap will shrink due to costs coming down.
Okay. Thank you for the added explanation. Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to clarify that point because I had noted the increased bond and just wanted to understand where that gap was, what might be coming. Brenda, you've been giving us updates, sending emails. Truly appreciate that. I hope you continue to keep us updated. As you said, if I remember the numbers, 29 million in, we can't let this project not succeed because of increased material costs and after all the hard work you've done. So I hope our community will come together on that, and thank you all for your time, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you. Oh, I will make a motion to accept staff report to match our city colleagues.
Okay, motion's been made for option 1 by Commissioner Dozier, seconded by Commissioner Maddox. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, just very briefly, I'd like to commend Ms. Williams for all of her hard work. I've seen her up close and personal. I know she cares about the residents, and she's certainly diligent and energetic as far as this project is concerned, and I am just very excited about seeing it come to fruition. So I just want to commend her and her staff, Ms. Thompson, and everybody involved, and she knows that we are very supported. And also, I want to say to Ms. Hill, I have been on a board with her father, Oliver, for over 20 years, and he is very dedicated to what he does. I know he's very dedicated to the Housing Authority, and I know that in the future, there will be reckoning as far as his service is concerned. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Cummings. Commissioner Welch, any comments from you, sir? Okay. We'll move on to the vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated by Commissioner Dozier, seconded by Commissioner Maddox for option 1, say aye. Aye. Commissioner Welch, are you here, sir? Okay, I say the motion passes 5-0 with Commissioner Welch and Vice Chair Proctor out of chambers. Ms. Williams, thank you very much. I'm not going to reiterate what everyone has already said, other than to say thank you for everything that you do. You have an important and very difficult job, and you do a great job with it. And then Commissioner Welch, just I don't know if he's on, but just wanted to wish him the best for him and his family. As you all know, he stated this publicly. He and his wife and his whole family have contracted COVID-19. So we're wishing him the best and hope that he gets well soon. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We stand adjourned.
Okay, good seeing you. All right.